The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Sweetwater, Wyoming, as Cole Bannister tied his chestnut mare to the hitching post outside the Broken Spoke Saloon. Dust from the journey still clung to his worn duster, the grime of 3 days' hard riding etched into the creases of his weathered face. He adjusted his hat lower over his eyes, a habit born of caution rather than courtesy before pushing through the batwing doors. The wall of noise hit him first. Tinny piano drunken laughter, the clink of glasses. Then the smell, whiskey, sweat, tobacco, and desperation. Cole paused, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimness, taking stock of the room with the careful assessment of a man who'd survived by noticing things others missed. Most patrons barely glanced his way, too concerned with their cards or their liquor, but at the far end of the bar, a red-faced man with wild eyes fixed him with a stare that prickled the hairs on Cole's neck. Cole moved to the bar, keeping his back to the wall. "Whiskey," he said to the barkeep, sliding a coin across the scarred wood. "Ain't seen you before," the barkeep remarked, pouring amber liquid into a smudged glass. "Just passing through." Cole's voice was graveled by trail dust and too many years of silence. The red-faced man lurched toward him, whiskey sloshing from his glass. "I know you," he slurred, pointing a thick finger. "You're that Yankee killer from Illinois." The room quieted, conversations dying, as men sensed the brewing storm. Cole sipped his whiskey, said nothing. "You rode with Sherman, didn't you?" The drunk swayed closer. "Burned everything in your path. Women and children, too." Cole set his glass down carefully. "You're mistaken, friend. Ain't your friend Blue Belly?" The man's hand hovered near his holster. "My brother died at Shiloh, shot in the back by cowards like you." A man near the piano muttered, "Leave it be, Horace. War's been over 20 years. "War ain't never over," Horace spat. "Not while these murderers walk free." His eyes narrowed at Cole. "I heard about you. They call you Quick Draw Cole back east. Say you killed a dozen men after the war. Claim it was self-defense." Cole's face remained impassive, but his body tensed ready. "I'm just having a drink." "You're having your last drink, Yankee bastard." Horace's hand dropped to his revolver. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for those watching. Horace had barely touched his gun when Cole moved. A flash of metal, the deafening crack of a single shot, and Horace stood frozen, a look of surprise on his florid face. He glanced down at the spreading red stain on his chest before crumpling to the sawdust-covered floor. The silence that followed was absolute. Cole holstered his revolver with steady hands, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The barkeep and patrons stared, faces pale in the dim light. The batwing doors swung open, and a broad-shouldered man wearing a tarnished star stepped inside. Sheriff James Blackwood surveyed the scene, eyes moving from Horace's body to Cole's gun, still smoking in its holster. "Christ almighty," the sheriff sighed. "Not even sundown, and already there's blood." "Self-defense, Sheriff," the barkeep offered. "Horace drew first. We all saw it." Sheriff Blackwood nodded slowly. "Always is with Horace." He fixed Cole with a measuring stare. "You got a name, stranger." "Cole Bannister." "Well, Mr. Bannister, your shooting's legal enough, but I suggest you ride on come morning. Horace had kin, and they ain't particular about proof when settling scores." Cole nodded, once tossed back his whiskey, and placed another coin on the bar for the cleanup. As he pushed through the doors into the fading daylight, the sheriff followed. "One more thing, Mr. Bannister," Blackwood said quietly. "I was at Antietam. I know the look of a man who's seen what we saw." He paused. "Whatever you're looking for, I hope you find it before your past catches up to you." Cole said nothing, just untied his horse and mounted up. As he rode away from the Broken Spoke, the weight of one more death settled on shoulders already burdened by too many. The memory of Gettysburg came to Cole in fragments. As he made camp that night, cannon fire. Like distant thunder, the copper smell of blood mixed with gunpowder screams that seemed to echo across the years. He sat beside his small fire coffee pot, heating on the Cole's rifle across his knees. The Wyoming night was clear and cold, stars pricking the vast darkness above. In such moments, the emptiness around him mirrored the hollow within. 22 years had passed since that July day in 1863, when the fate of a nation hinged on a desperate charge across an open field. Cole had been just 19, a farm boy who'd enlisted with dreams of glory and a conviction that slavery must end. By then, he'd already surveyed Bull Run and Antietam, his idealism replaced by the grim determination to keep himself and his comrades alive. His regiment had been positioned near a copse of trees when Pickett's charge began. Through gun smoke and chaos, Cole had fired until his barrel burned his hands, and then, in the confusion of hand-to-hand combat, he'd found himself face to face with a Confederate officer, little more than a boy with fierce eyes and an aristocratic bearing.
"I don't want to shoot you,"
Cole had shouted over the din of battle. The young officer had smiled grimly. "Then today you die," he'd replied, raising his pistol. Cole's shot had caught him square in the chest. As the young man fell, surprise replacing determination in his eyes, something dropped from his hand. A locket containing a miniature portrait of a beautiful woman. Cole had picked it up, intending to return it to the dying man, but a shell exploded nearby, and he was pulled back into the fight. Only later, searching among the dead to help the wounded, did Cole learn the young officer's name from papers in his pocket, Lieutenant Robert Harrington of Virginia. That night, Cole had written a letter to his own mother, tucking the locket inside with instructions to send it to the Harrington family with his condolences when the war ended. He never knew if she'd done so. 3 months later, his entire family, mother, father, 2 younger sisters, were dead, their Illinois farm burned to the ground by Confederate raiders. Cole tossed the dregs of his coffee into the fire, watching the flames hiss and spark. After the war, he'd worn a badge in Kansas, Missouri, and Colorado, trying to impose order on lawless territories. But peacetime justice proved more complicated than wartime clarity. Too often, the line between lawman and outlaw blurred, especially when wealthy interests were involved. He'd left his last position as deputy marshal in Denver after refusing to evict farmers for a railroad baron. Since then, he'd drifted westward, taking odd jobs haunted by nightmares of battles long past and more recent ghosts, men he'd killed as a lawman, some deserving, others caught in circumstances beyond their control. Now, at 41, Cole Bannister was tired of running. The advertisement in a Denver newspaper had caught his eye. Land for sale. Redemption Valley, Wyoming territory. Good water, fertile soil. Ideal for determined settler. Something about the name Redemption had called to him. Perhaps in this remote valley he could finally build something lasting, something good to balance the ledger of his violent past. As sleep claimed him, Cole wondered if redemption was even possible for a man whose hands would never be clean. Redemption Valley opened before him like a vision from Scripture, a wide verdant expanse cradled by rugged mountains, still capped with snow despite the May warmth. A creek meandered through cottonwoods and willows, the water glinting like hammered silver in the morning light. Beyond, grasslands rolled toward distant bluffs, where cattle grazed in scattered groups. Cole reined in his horse at the valley's entrance, removed his hat, and for the first time in years, felt something like hope stir within him. The town itself was larger than he'd expected, perhaps 50 buildings straddling a main street, with newer structures sprouting alongside roads. A church spire rose above the rooftops, and beyond it, Cole could make out the head frame of a mine standing stark against the landscape. He urged his horse forward, dust rising from the road as he approached. Children paused in their play to watch him pass, and women on porches whispered behind hands. Cole kept his eyes forward, aware of how he must appear trail-worn, unshaven, a stranger in a place where strangers were suspect. The general store bore a freshly painted sign, Morgan's Mercantile and Post. Cole dismounted, tied his horse, and stepped inside the bell above the door, announcing his arrival. The store smelled of coffee leather and dried apples. A heavy-set black man with powerful arms and a neatly trimmed beard looked up from behind the counter. "Good day to you, sir," the man said, his voice deep and measured. "Jacob Morgan, proprietor. What can I help you with?" "Cole Bannister," Cole replied, extending his hand. "Looking for information about a land sale. Advertisement mentioned Hiram Stevens as the seller." Jacob's handshake was firm. "Old man Stevens passed 2 months back, I'm afraid. His widow's handling his affairs, now staying with her daughter over by the church." He studied Cole thoughtfully. "You're interested in buying Stevens's homestead?" Cole nodded. "If it's still available." "It is, though I'm surprised," Jacob said. "Land's good enough, but it's situated peculiarly." He hesitated. "You planning to settle permanent like?" "That's my intention." Jacob seemed to come to a decision. "Then best you know how things stand in redemption before you commit your money." He lowered his voice. "The Stevens place sits between Harrington Land and the South Creek Prime Water Access. Harrington, William Harrington, owns the coal mine, the largest cattle spread, and half the town mortgages." Jacob's expression remained neutral, but his eyes conveyed volumes. "Man came west after the war, made a fortune quickly. Some say too quickly." Cole absorbed this information silently. "He's been trying to buy the Stevens place for years," Jacob continued. "Offered good money, too, but Hiram was stubborn. Now Mrs. Stevens needs the cash, but she's her husband's match for determination. Says she won't sell to Harrington out of respect for Hiram's wishes." "Any particular reason Stevens disliked this Harrington?" Jacob glanced toward the door before answering. "Hiram was a simple man, but he had principles. Didn't care for how Harrington treats his workers or how men who cross him tend to suffer accidents." He straightened up, voice returning to normal volume. "But that's just valley talk. You'd want to form your own impressions." Cole nodded his thanks and purchased supplies, coffee, bacon, beans, ammunition. As Jacob packed the goods, the bell chimed again, and a tall, broad-shouldered man with a silver star entered. "Morning, Jacob," the man said, then turned curious eyes on Cole. "Don't believe we've met. Sheriff Thomas Tanner." He didn't offer his hand. "Cole Bannister," Cole replied evenly. "Just arrived. Passing through." There was something hopeful in the question. "Looking to settle, actually. The Stevens homestead." The sheriff's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's so. Well, Mr. Bannister, Redemption's a peaceful town. We like to keep it that way." "That makes 2 of us, Sheriff." Tanner studied him a moment longer. "You've worn a badge before." It wasn't a question. "In another life." "Well, in this life, I'm the law here. Remember that." He turned to Jacob. "Need some tobacco when you're done with Mr. Bannister." As Cole gathered his supplies and headed for the door, he heard the sheriff mutter, "Just what we need. Another gunslinger thinking to put down roots." Outside, Cole squinted in the bright sunlight, considering what he'd learned. The Stevens place was apparently desirable enough to create tension, and he'd already managed to put the local law on edge. Not the fresh start he'd hoped for. He mounted his horse and headed toward the church, determined to at least see this land before making any decisions. As he rode, he noted the mix of prosperity and struggle, typical of Western towns, new buildings rising alongside weathered structures, well-dressed businessmen passing laborers with coal dust ground into their skin. The church stood on a gentle rise at the edge of town, a simple white-clapboard building with a tall steeple. Behind it spread a cemetery where fresh flowers brightened some graves, while others stood forgotten under leaning markers. A small cottage nestled in the church's shadow. Cole dismounted and approached, removing his hat as he knocked on the door. It opened to reveal a young woman with striking features, auburn hair pulled back severely, intelligent green eyes, a determined set to her jaw. She wore a plain, dark dress with a white collar, and something in her bearing reminded Cole of the schoolteachers of his youth, formal proper, yet with a hint of fire beneath the surface. "Yes?" she asked, her voice cultured but not unwelcoming. "Ma'am, I'm looking for Mrs. Stevens. I understand she's staying here. Aunt Martha is resting. I'm Caroline Bennett. May I ask your business with her, sister, Cole Bannister, Miss Bennett? I'm interested in purchasing the Stevens homestead." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps concern. "I see. Are you associated with Mr. Harrington?" "No, ma'am. Just a man looking for land to call his own." She studied him a moment, as if weighing his words against some internal measure. "Please come in, Mr. Bannister. I'll see if Aunt Martha is feeling up to visitors." The cottage interior was modest but immaculate polished wood, simple furnishings, a bookshelf heavy with volumes. Cole remained standing, hat in hand, as Caroline disappeared into a back room. A few minutes later, she returned with an elderly woman leaning heavily on her arm. Mrs. Stevens was frail, her face lined with grief and age, but her eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in Cole's measure. "So you want Hiram's land?" she said without preamble, lowering herself into a chair. "Why?" The directness of the question caught Cole off guard. "Ma'am, you heard me, young man. I want to know why you want that particular piece of ground. There's plenty of land in Wyoming. Why come to Redemption Valley? Why Hiram's place?" Cole considered his answer carefully. "I've been moving a long time, Mrs. Stevens, looking for somewhere to stop. Your husband's advertisement spoke of good water and fertile soil, mentioned redemption. That word means something to me." The old woman's gaze softened slightly. "Meant something to Hiram, too. He named this valley, did you know, that first settler here after the war. Said every man deserved a second chance in this life." She sighed. "You a drinking man, Mr. Bannister?" "No, ma'am." "Gambling?" "No." "You have family?" "Not anymore." She nodded as if confirming something to herself. "The price is $800. Cash. And one condition, you must live on the land yourself for at least 5 years. No selling, no leasing. Especially not to William Harrington or his interests." Cole's eyebrows rose. "That's a significant condition, Mrs. Stevens." "It is. My Hiram believed that land belongs to those who work it, not those who exploit it. Harrington has enough. He doesn't need Hiram's piece of redemption, too." "And if I agree," Mrs. Stevens exchanged a glance with Caroline, "then we can complete the sale today. Caroline here is a notary among her many talents. She can witness the deed transfer." Cole hesitated only briefly. "I agree to your terms, Mrs. Stevens." Something like relief crossed the old woman's face. "Good. Caroline will handle the paperwork. I find I need to rest again." She fixed Cole with a final penetrating look. "Don't make me regret trusting you, young man." As Mrs. Stevens retreated to her room, Caroline retrieved papers from a small desk. "You should know," she said quietly, "that by purchasing this land, you may be making a powerful enemy in William Harrington." "So I gather," Cole replied. "May I ask your connection to Mrs. Stevens? You called her aunt, but—" "No blood relation," Caroline explained, arranging the deed paperwork. "My father was Redemption's pastor for 15 years. He and Hiram were close friends. When father died 3 years ago, the Stevens became my family." A shadow crossed her face. "And when Hiram passed and Martha fell ill, it seemed natural that she would stay with me. Your father was the pastor, but you live in the cottage, not the parsonage." Caroline's expression cooled. "The church committee hasn't seen fit to appoint a new minister yet. I maintain the church teach Sunday school and provide what spiritual guidance I can, despite my limitations of gender." There was a controlled anger in her voice. The cottage was originally built for my father. The parsonage now houses the mine office. Cole caught her meaning. Harrington's mine. Yes, Harrington Coal and Development. She dipped her pen and pushed the deed toward him. Sign here, Mr. Bannister, and may God help you if you've made this decision lightly. Cole signed, counting out $800 from the money belt beneath his shirt, nearly all he had left in the world. As Caroline added her signature as witness, he studied her more carefully. There was something compelling about this woman, a combination of strength and vulnerability, righteousness and practicality. The property is 3 miles north, she said, sanding the ink. Follow the creek past the split rock. You'll see a stand of cottonwoods and the remains of a cabin. Hiram was rebuilding when his heart gave out. She hesitated. It's good land, Mr. Bannister. I hope you find what you're looking for there. Cole folded the deed carefully and tucked it inside his coat. Thank you for your help, Miss Bennet. Perhaps I'll see you at Sunday service. A genuine smile briefly transformed her serious face. I hope so, Mr. Bannister. Redemption could use more souls seeking redemption. The Stevens homestead exceeded Cole's expectations. A natural bowl of fertile land nestled against a rocky hillside with the creek curving along its western edge. The half-finished cabin stood on a slight rise, providing views across the entire property and down the valley toward town. Cole spent the remainder of that day exploring his new possession, noting the meadow where he could grow hay, the sheltered areas suitable for vegetables, the places where cattle could graze. A collapsed barn would need rebuilding, and the cabin required significant work, but the essential elements were solid. As twilight descended, he built a fire outside the cabin's doorway and prepared a simple meal. The valley quieted around him, only the murmur of the creek and occasional night birds breaking the silence. For the first time in years, Cole felt something like peace. That peace shattered at dawn. Cole woke to the sound of approaching horses. He rolled from his bedroll, grabbed his rifle, and moved to the cabin's single window, positioning himself in shadow. 6 riders approached, 5 men in working clothes and 1 woman. Even at a distance, Cole recognized Caroline Bennett's straight-backed posture and auburn hair. The men were strangers, their expressions grim as they reined in their horses near the remains of the barn. Cole stepped from the cabin, rifle held casually but ready. Morning, Miss Bennet. Didn't expect a welcoming committee. Caroline's face was ashen. Mr. Bannister, She broke off, seemingly unable to continue. One of the men, older than the others, with a face weathered by sun and wind, spoke up. Name's Peterson. I ranch north of here. He gestured toward a stand of trees beyond Cole's property. One of my hands found something there this morning. Thought you should know, being as it's technically on your land now. Found what? Cole asked, though something cold settled in his stomach. Peterson exchanged glances with his companions. Best you see for yourself, Mr. Bannister. Cole nodded, retrieved his pistol and gun belt from the cabin, and followed the group toward the trees. Caroline rode beside him, her horse nervously sidestepping. I'm sorry about this, she said quietly. I would have come alone, but a single woman visiting a man's homestead would cause talk, Cole finished for her. I understand, Miss Bennet. The stand of trees was perhaps a quarter-mile from the cabin, a dozen ancient oaks, whose sprawling branches created a cathedral-like space beneath. As they approached, Cole saw what had brought them here. A man's body hung from a thick branch, slowly turning in the morning breeze. He appeared to be Mexican, or perhaps Native American, dressed in simple work clothes. A crude sign had been nailed to the tree trunk, Harrington Justice for Thieves. Cole's jaw tightened. He handed his rifle to Caroline and approached the hanging man. The body was still relatively fresh, perhaps dead only hours. Anyone know him? Cole asked. Luis Rodriguez, one of Peterson's men answered. Worked at the Harrington Ranch. Good hand with horses. What was he supposed to have stolen? Peterson shook his head. Rumor was some cattle went missing last week. Harrington blamed his Mexican workers. No proof, far as I heard. Cole examined the ground around the tree, noting multiple hoof prints and boot marks. This happened last night. Professional job, not a lynch mob. They used a proper hanging knot. He looked up at the body. And they chose this location deliberately. Message to you, Peterson said grimly. First day on your property, and Harrington's already showing who really runs this valley. Cole turned to Caroline, whose face remained composed despite the grim scene. Miss Bennett, would you ride to town and inform Sheriff Tanner? We'll cut him down and bring him in. Caroline nodded, but Peterson interjected, Sheriff won't do nothing. He's Harrington's man. Maybe so, Cole replied, but we'll do this properly all the same. He looked back at the hanging man. Everyone deserves dignity in death, at least. As Caroline rode toward town, Cole and the ranchers carefully cut down Luis Rodriguez and laid him on a tarp brought by one of the men. In the victim's pocket, Cole found a small wooden cross on a leather cord and a folded letter in Spanish addressed to a family in Chihuahua. Cole tucked these items away carefully. I'll make sure these reach his family. Peterson studied Cole with new respect. You've handled death before. More than my share, Cole admitted. Was a lawman once. Figured as much. Peterson squinted toward town. Word of advice, Bannister whatever brought you to redemption, it might not be worth your life. Harrington doesn't take kindly to folks who don't bend to his will. Noted? Cole said, his expression betraying nothing. But I just spent my last dollar on this land. I'm not inclined to give it up on my first day. They wrapped Rodriguez's body and secured it across a horse. As they prepared to head to town, hoofbeats announced Caroline's return, accompanied by Sheriff Tanner and another rider, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, silver-haired and expensively dressed, mounted on a magnificent black stallion. Cole knew without being told that he was looking at William Harrington. Mr. Bannister, Caroline said, her voice tight with tension. This is Mr. William Harrington. Harrington surveyed the scene with cold blue eyes, gaze lingering on the wrapped body before settling on Cole. So you're the newcomer who purchased Stevens's troublesome patch. His voice carried the cultured accent of Virginia aristocracy. Seems you've had an inauspicious beginning to your time in redemption. Finding a murdered man on my property wasn't in my plans, Cole replied evenly. Murdered. Harrington's eyebrows rose. Sheriff, did you hear that our new neighbor accuses me of murder? Sheriff Tanner shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Now, Mr. Bannister, let's not jump to conclusions. Hanging's a legal punishment for horse theft in Wyoming territory. After a trial, Cole said. Was there a trial, Sheriff? Rodriguez confessed, Harrington interjected smoothly. To me, personally, as the wronged party, frontier justice allows certain expediences. Cole met Harrington's gaze directly. And you chose to hang him on my property by coincidence. A thin smile crossed Harrington's face. The location was selected by my foreman. Perhaps he was unaware of the recent change in ownership. He adjusted his leather gloves. I do apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Bannister. Sheriff Tanner will see to the body. The man had family, Cole said. In Mexico. Indeed, well, Sheriff, ensure that any personal effects are returned to his people. Harrington turned his horse. Mr. Bannister, perhaps you'll join me for dinner tomorrow evening, as amends for this unfortunate introduction and to properly welcome you to redemption. His tone made the invitation a command. Before Cole could respond, Harrington continued, Miss Bennett, always a pleasure. I trust your aunt is recovering well. Do remind her that my offer for the Stevens property remains open should Mr. Bannister find valley life unsuitable. With that, he touched his hat and rode away, followed by Sheriff Tanner, leading the horse bearing Rodriguez's body. An uncomfortable silence fell over the remaining group. Peterson and his men muttered excuses and departed. leaving Cole alone with Caroline. "That man," Cole said quietly, "is dangerous." "Yes?" Caroline agreed, her voice barely audible. "More than you know." She straightened in her saddle. "Be careful at dinner tomorrow, Mr. Bannister. William Harrington doesn't extend invitations without purpose. I don't plan to accept." "You must," she insisted. Refusing would only provoke him further. She hesitated. "My father always said, 'Know thine enemy as thyself.' If you intend to stay in redemption, you need to understand who you're facing." Cole studied her intently. "You seem to know Harrington well." "Not by choice." Caroline's green eyes darkened with something like fear. "After my father died, Harrington offered marriage, a business arrangement, he called it. The church needed a patron, and he needed respectability." Her mouth tightened. "I declined." "And he took the parsonage anyway." "Yes." The church committee saw no reason to refuse his generous donation. Bitterness tinged her words. "Mr. Bannister, I should warn you Harrington has informants throughout the valley. Whatever you say or do will likely reach his ears." Cole nodded thoughtfully. Why stay Miss Bennet, with such a man controlling the town? "This is my home," she said simply. "My father's buried here. His work isn't finished." She gathered her rein. "And where would I go, a single woman with no family, no fortune? At least here, I have purpose." As she turned her horse to leave, Cole called after her. "Miss Bennet, why did you really come with Peterson this morning?" Caroline paused, considering her answer carefully. "To see what kind of man you are, Mr. Bannister. Redemption has had its fill of men who look away from injustice." She met his gaze directly. "I haven't decided about you yet." Cole watched her ride away, her straight back and proud carriage at odds with the simple, severe clothing she wore. Then he turned toward the hanging tree, studying the sign still nailed to its trunk. "Harrington Justice for Thieves." With deliberate movements, Cole pulled the sign free and broke it over his knee. He tossed the pieces into the underbrush, then walked slowly back to his cabin, the weight of a new conflict settling over him. He had come to redemption, seeking peace. Instead, he had stumbled into a war, one that had apparently been raging long before his arrival. The sensible course would be to sell the land back to Mrs. Stevens and move on. But as Cole looked across the beautiful valley that was now his home, he knew he wouldn't run. Not this time. Whether from stubbornness, fatigue with endless wandering, or some deeper need to finally stand his ground, Cole Bannister had found his redemption, and he would fight to keep it. Even if that meant facing William Harrington, a man whose cold eyes reminded Cole of battlefields long past and enemies he'd hoped to forget. The Harrington estate sprawled across a hillside overlooking Redemption Valley, its white-columned facade glowing amber in the setting sun. Cole approached on horseback, dressed in the cleanest clothes he possessed, a dark blue shirt, black vest, and the one pair of trousers without trail dust ground into the fabric. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair with water, though he remained painfully aware that he looked like what he was, a weathered drifter playing at respectability. A black man in livery took his horse at the entrance. "Mr. Bannister," the man asked quietly. When Cole nodded, he continued, "Master expects you in the study. Follow the hallway to your right." The house interior spoke of wealth, transported intact, from the east-polished mahogany crystal chandeliers, oil paintings in gilt frames. Cole passed a formal dining room where servants arranged silver on fine china, though no other guests appeared to be expected. The study door stood ajar. Cole knocked once, then entered at Harrington's invitation. The room was a masculine sanctuary of leather-bound books, hunting trophies, and the lingering scent of tobacco. A fire crackled in a stone hearth despite the mild evening. William Harrington stood by a sideboard, pouring amber liquid into crystal tumblers. He had changed from his riding clothes into evening attire, black suit, crisp white shirt, silk waistcoat. The transformation emphasized his commanding presence and the gulf between his station and Cole's. "Mr. Bannister," Harrington said without turning, "punctuality is a virtue I appreciate. Bourbon." He offered a glass. Cole accepted with a nod of thanks. The bourbon was clearly expensive smooth, with complex undertones of oak and spice, a stark contrast to the raw whiskey he usually encountered. "Please sit." Harrington gestured to a leather armchair before taking his own seat behind a massive desk. "I trust you're settling into your new property." "Beginning to," Cole replied. "The cabin needs work." "Indeed. Poor Stevens never finished it. Heart trouble, they say." Harrington sipped his bourbon, studying Cole over the rim of his glass. "You've been a busy man these past 2 days. Jacob Morgan delivered lumber yesterday. I understand you've already begun repairs." Cole noted the casual revelation that Harrington monitored his activities. "Seems a waste to sleep under stars when I have walls and a roof, however incomplete. Practical. I admire that." Harrington leaned back, his manner deceptively casual. "Tell me, Mr. Bannister, what brings a man like you to Redemption Valley? Your hands suggest familiarity with both firearms and hard labor. Your speech marks you as educated despite your frontier appearance." Cole chose his words carefully. "I saw opportunity in this valley. Chance to build something lasting." "Admirable," Harrington nodded. "I came west with similar ambitions after the war. Virginia had little left to offer a man of enterprise." He gestured toward the window where the last light illuminated distant mountains. "This country rewards boldness, Mr. Bannister. Those willing to seize opportunity rather than wait for permission." A servant appeared silently in the doorway. "Dinner is served, sir." They moved to the dining room, where places had been set at opposite ends of a table that could easily seat 20. The spatial separation created a strange intimacy, two men alone in a room designed for society, with only servants as witnesses. The meal proceeded with polite conversation about the valley's weather patterns, local wildlife, and the region's economic prospects. Harrington proved knowledgeable and articulate, his manner almost professorial when discussing Wyoming's potential. It was only when dessert was served, a rich bread pudding with bourbon sauce, that Harrington finally revealed his purpose. "Mr. Bannister, I'll speak plainly. The Stevens property is of particular interest to me. It contains the most accessible entrance to a coal seam that runs beneath my northern holdings." He dabbed his lips with a linen napkin. "I'll offer you $2,000 for the land, more than double what you paid. You'd be free to purchase larger, more suitable property elsewhere in the valley." Cole set down his spoon. "Mrs. Stevens attached conditions to the sale. The land can't be resold for 5 years. Legal conditions can be amended when all parties benefit," Harrington replied smoothly. "I'd compensate Mrs. Stevens as well, of course. And if I prefer to keep the land..." Something hardened in Harrington's eyes, though his smile remained fixed. "You witnessed yesterday how difficult frontier life can be. Accidents, theft, natural disasters. A man alone faces considerable challenges." The threat hung in the air between them. Cole met Harrington's gaze steadily. "I've faced challenges before." "No doubt." Harrington pushed his dessert aside. "You were a Union man, weren't you? Your bearing suggests military training." Cole tensed slightly. "I served." "As did I, though we wore different colors." Harrington's voice remained conversational, but his eyes had grown cold. "Confederate cavalry under Stuart. Later, I had the honor of serving on General Lee's staff." He studied Cole intently. "Strange how war makes enemies of men who might otherwise respect one another." "The war's been over 20 years, Cole observed. "Has it?" Harrington raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps on paper, but some wounds never heal, Mr. Bannister. Some debts remain unpaid." A clock chimed 9, breaking the tension. Harrington rose. "Consider my offer. $2,000 would establish you comfortably anywhere in the territory. He extended his hand. I believe we could be allies, Mr. Bannister. Redemption Valley needs men of vision and strength. Cole stood and shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip that belied Harrington's 60 years. I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Harrington. I'll consider what you've said. As Cole collected his hat and prepared to leave, Harrington added, one more thing. I understand you've become acquainted with Miss Bennet. His tone remained pleasant, but something possessive lurked beneath. Caroline is a remarkable woman, educated, virtuous, descended from fine Virginia stock. Her father was a good man, if misguided in his sympathies. I consider myself her protector since his passing. Miss Bennet strikes me as capable of protecting herself, Cole replied. Harrington's smile tightened. Even capable women benefit from male guidance in this harsh country. Good night, Mr. Bannister. My man will bring your horse. As Cole rode away from the Harrington estate, the night air cool against his face, he replayed the conversation in his mind. The dinner had been both a bribe and a warning wrapped in the trappings of civilization. Harrington wanted his land and would not be easily dissuaded. More troubling was the reference to the war. Something in Harrington's manner suggested personal animosity beyond the general North-South divisions that still lingered. Cole wondered if their paths had crossed during the conflict, though he couldn't place the man among the Confederate officers he'd encountered. The moon rose full and bright over the valley, silvering the landscape. Cole followed the creek toward his property, mind turning over possibilities and threats. He was so absorbed in thought that he almost missed the figure waiting by the split rock, marking the approach to his land. He reined in sharply, hand dropping to his revolver. It's only me, Mr. Bannister. Caroline Bennet emerged from the shadows, mounted on a gray mare. She wore a dark riding habit, her hair concealed beneath a small hat. Miss Bennet! Cole acknowledged surprise evident in his voice. Riding alone at night seems risky for a woman concerned with propriety. Some risks outweigh others. She urged her horse alongside his. I needed to speak with you away from prying eyes and ears. They continued toward Cole's cabin, the creek murmuring beside the trail. I take it you dined with Harrington, she said. Did he offer to buy your land? $2,000. She nodded as if confirming a suspicion. And when you refused? I didn't refuse outright. Seemed wiser to appear to consider the offer. Wise indeed. Caroline's voice was tight with tension. Mr. Bannister, there's something you should know about William Harrington. Something beyond his business dealings. Cole waited silently as she gathered her thoughts. 3 years ago, my father discovered financial irregularities in the church accounts. Funds for the orphan asylum and widow's relief had been diverted to purchase mining equipment. She stared straight ahead as they rode. The church treasurer was Harrington's man. When Father confronted him, the treasurer claimed he'd been following Harrington's explicit instructions. Did your father take this to the sheriff? Piet. A bitter laugh escaped her. Sheriff Tanner! He owes his position to Harrington. No father confronted Harrington directly threatened to write to the territorial governor. She swallowed hard. A week later, he died in a tragic accident while inspecting the church roof. Witnesses claimed he slipped, but my father was sure-footed as a mountain goat, Mr. Bannister. He'd repaired that roof a dozen times. Cole absorbed this information grimly. You believe Harrington had him murdered. I know it, though I can't prove it. They had reached Cole's property now, the cabin a dark silhouette against the starry sky. Caroline reined in her horse. There's more. Since Father's death, 3 people who questioned Harrington's business practices have suffered similar accidents. The newspaper editor who investigated the church finances died in a printing press malfunction. A miner who organized complaints about safety conditions was crushed in a shaft collapse. And Hiram Stevens, who refused to sell his land, died of heart failure, Cole finished. after receiving a letter threatening his wife's safety. Caroline's eyes glittered in the moonlight. Martha burned the letter, fearing reprisals if she showed it to anyone. She only told me on her deathbed. Cole dismounted and offered a hand to help Caroline down. "Why are you telling me this, Miss Bennet? Why risk coming here tonight?" She accepted his assistance, her gloved hand resting briefly in his. "Because I saw how you handled Luis Rodriguez's body. With dignity. Because you looked Harrington in the eye at the hanging tree when even Sheriff Tanner wouldn't." She straightened her riding skirt. "And because I know what Harrington does to those who stand in his way." Cole gestured toward the cabin's rough-hewn bench. "You think I'm in danger. I know you are." Caroline sat arranging her skirts. "Mr. Bannister, did Harrington mention the war during dinner? He said he served with the Confederate cavalry later on Lee's staff. Did he ask about your service? He knew I was Union." Cole leaned against a porch post, studying her face in the moonlight. "Miss Bennet, what aren't you telling me?" She hesitated, then said, "Harrington lost his only son at Gettysburg. Lieutenant Robert Harrington, barely 20, serving in the 19th Virginia Infantry. Since then, Harrington has harbored particular hatred for Union veterans." She looked up at him intently. "Whatever brought you to redemption, Mr. Bannister, your military past puts you in additional danger with Harrington." Cole felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Robert Harrington. The young officer he'd shot at Gettysburg. The locket with the woman's portrait. It couldn't be coincidence. "Miss Bennet," he said carefully, "how do you know these details about Harrington's son?" "My father was a chaplain with the Army of the Potomac before coming west. He kept journals of the war years." Her expression softened. "He wrote of a young lieutenant named Robert Harrington who died bravely facing overwhelming odds. Father always said war made victims of both sides." Cole struggled to keep his expression neutral as the pieces aligned with sickening clarity. He had killed William Harrington's son. And now, by cruel twist of fate, he had settled on land coveted by the father of the man whose death had haunted his dreams for decades. "Mr. Bannister." Caroline's voice broke through his thoughts. "Are you unwell?" "Just tired," he managed. "It's been a long day." She rose, clearly unconvinced but too polite to press. "I should return before my absence is noticed. I only wanted to warn you, Harrington doesn't make idle threats. If you're determined to stay, be on your guard." "I appreciate your concern, Miss Bennet," Cole said, helping her remount. "But why risk Harrington's displeasure to warn a stranger?" Caroline gathered her reins, her expression solemn in the moonlight. "Because this valley was meant to be a place of redemption, Mr. Bannister. My father believed that. Hiram Stevens believed it. I must believe it too, or their deaths meant nothing." She straightened in the saddle. "Good night, Mr. Bannister. I'll pray for your safety." Cole watched her ride away, her figure gradually swallowed by darkness. Then he entered his cabin and lit a lamp, his movements mechanical as his mind reeled from the revelation. The chances of this coincidence were infinitesimal. Of all the places in the vast western territories he had chosen, the valley controlled by the father of the man whose death marked him most deeply. Was this divine punishment cosmic justice, or simply the cruel humor of a capricious fate? Sleep eluded him that night. Cole sat in the cabin's single chair, revolver on the table before him, turning over possibilities. He could sell the land, despite Mrs. Stevens's conditions. He could explain to Caroline the impossible situation. He could move on, as he had so many times before. But dawn found him still in the chair, his decision made. He would stay, not from stubbornness alone, but from a growing conviction that his arrival in Redemption Valley was no accident. Perhaps this was his opportunity to make amends, not by running from his past, but by facing it directly. And if William Harrington discovered the truth that Cole had killed his son, then so be it. Some reckonings couldn't be avoided, only confronted. Sunday morning brought clear skies and a crisp autumn breeze. Cole dressed with care in his cleanest clothes and walked the 3 miles to town, joining the stream of families heading toward the white church on the hill. The building's interior was simple but beautiful. Polished wooden pews, clear glass windows that filled the space with light, a modest altar covered with a hand-embroidered cloth. Cole slipped into a back pew, nodding politely to the curious glances from Redemption's residents. Jacob Morgan, the shopkeeper, approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Bannister, good to see you joining us. How's the cabin coming along? Roof's sound now, working on the walls next." "Glad to hear it." Jacob lowered his voice. "Not many expected you'd stay after finding Rodriguez. Harrington usually gets his way sooner or later." "I'm not easily discouraged," Cole replied. "So I see." Jacob seemed about to say more when the church fell suddenly silent. William Harrington had entered, accompanied by Sheriff Tanner and several well-dressed men whom Cole assumed were business associates. Harrington moved down the center aisle with the confidence of a man who owned the ground he walked upon, nodding graciously to congregants who murmured respectful greetings. He paused at Cole's pew, surprise briefly crossing his features before his mask of civility returned. "Mr. Bannister, I didn't take you for a church-going man." "Full of surprises," Cole replied mildly. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed." He continued to the front pew, which apparently was reserved for him by custom, if not by marker. A rustle of fabric announced Caroline's entrance from a side door. She wore a simple blue dress with a white collar, her auburn hair arranged in a modest knot. Despite the severe styling, she possessed a natural grace that drew every eye. Cole was struck by the transformation. Gone was the tense, secretive woman who had visited his cabin by moonlight. In her place stood a figure of quiet authority as she took her position behind the pulpit. "Let us pray," she began, her clear voice carrying to the farthest corners. Cole bowed his head, but kept his eyes open, studying the congregation through lowered lashes. Most seemed genuinely devout, though he noted Harrington and his associates merely went through the motions of prayer heads barely inclined. When Caroline began her sermon, Cole was impressed by her eloquence. She spoke on David and Goliath, emphasizing not the violence of the confrontation, but David's moral courage in facing overwhelming odds. David's victory came not from the stone in his sling, she said, her gaze sweeping the congregation, but from his unwavering faith that righteousness must prevail against tyranny, no matter how powerful the tyrant may appear. Her eyes briefly met Cole's, then flickered toward Harrington, the message unmistakable. Cole glanced at Harrington and found the man watching Caroline with narrowed eyes, clearly recognizing the subtext of her sermon. After the service, congregants gathered outside to socialize in the autumn sunshine. Cole remained apart, observing the social dynamics of his new community. Caroline was surrounded by women and children, her manner warm, yet maintaining the dignity of her quasi-clerical position. Harrington held court with the town's businessmen, his deep laugh occasionally rising above the general conversation. "Mr. Bannister?" A soft voice drew Cole's attention. An elderly black woman with intelligent eyes and a dignified bearing stood beside him. "I'm Sarah Washington. I manage Mr. Harrington's household." Cole recognized her as the woman who had overseen the dinner service. "Ma'am," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "I've worked for the Harrington family since before the war," she continued quietly. "Came west with Mr. William after Virginia had nothing left for either of us." Her eyes held Cole's steadily. "I know men of violence, Mr. Bannister, seen too many in my years. You carry it differently than most." Cole remained silent, unsure of her purpose. "Miss Caroline has taken an interest in your welfare," Sarah observed. "That puts you in danger. She doesn't understand the depths of Mr. Williams' convictions." "And you do?" Sarah's voice dropped further. I was there when word came about young Master Robert. Saw what it did to his father. Grief changes a man, Mr. Bannister, sometimes twists him. She glanced toward Harrington, then back to Cole. Be careful in this valley, especially around that cabin. Before Cole could question her meaning, Sarah melted back into the crowd, returning to her employer's side with the practiced invisibility of a lifelong servant. Cole pondered her cryptic warning as he made his way toward Jacob Morgan, who stood conversing with Caroline and a few other congregants. As he approached, he overheard their discussion about repairs needed for the church roof, the same roof from which Caroline's father had supposedly fallen. And at least $500 for proper materials, Jacob was saying. The committee won't approve such expenditure without Mr. Harrington's support, and he's made it clear the mine office takes priority for repairs. The roof won't last another winter, Caroline replied, frustration evident in her voice. Last Sunday's service included 3 strategically placed buckets during the rainfall. Cole joined their circle. I have some experience with roofing. Happy to take a look if you'd like. Caroline's expression brightened. Mr. Bannister, that would be most appreciated. Free of charge, Cole added. Consider it my contribution to the community. How generous, came a cold voice from behind him. William Harrington approached, his smile fixed and insincere. Our new neighbor offers his services as handyman to our lovely Miss Bennet. Caroline stiffened. Mr. Harrington, the church roof requires immediate attention. Mr. Bannister has kindly offered his expertise. Indeed. Harrington's gaze moved between them. I wasn't aware Mr. Bannister possessed such skills, but then he's full of surprises. Attending church, offering charity. His eyes hardened. One might almost suspect ulterior motives. Cole met his gaze evenly. Just being neighborly, Mr. Harrington. Of course. Harrington turned to Caroline. Miss Bennet, I've been meaning to discuss the orphan asylum funds with you. Perhaps you'd join me for tea this afternoon. Mrs. Washington has prepared those lemon cakes you favor. The invitation was framed as a request, but delivered as a command. Caroline's hesitation was barely perceptible before she replied, Thank you, Mr. Harrington, but I've promised to visit Mrs. Peterson this afternoon. Her time is near. Another day, then. Harrington's smile remained fixed as he turned back to Cole. Mr. Bannister, have you reconsidered my offer for your property? I have, Cole replied. I'm declining. The land suits my needs. A flash of anger crossed Harrington's face before his mask of civility returned. Perhaps you misunderstood the advantages of my proposal. $2,000 represents a considerable profit on your investment. It's not about the money, Mr. Harrington. It's always about money, Mr. Bannister, or power, sometimes both. Harrington adjusted his gloves with deliberate precision. Consider carefully before refusing my generosity. Redemption Valley can be hospitable or hostile depending on one's alignments. With that, he departed Sheriff Tanner and his business associates following like an entourage. Jacob exhaled slowly. You've made an enemy, Mr. Bannister. Harrington doesn't take rejection well. So I gather. Cole turned to Caroline. When would you like me to examine the roof? Tomorrow afternoon, she suggested. After I return from Mrs. Peterson's farm. Cole nodded his agreement, then took his leave, declining several invitations to Sunday dinner from curious congregants. He preferred to use the remaining daylight for work on his cabin. The 3-mile walk back to his property gave Cole time to consider the morning's events. Harrington's animosity had been thinly veiled, Sarah's warning cryptic but urgent, and Caroline, her sermon, had been both spiritual guidance and political statement, delivered with courage that impressed him despite the risks she took. Lost in thought, Cole almost missed the movement in the trees as he approached his land. He slowed, hand dropping casually to his revolver, senses suddenly alert. 3 riders emerged from the cottonwoods, rough-looking men with the hard eyes of hired guns. Cole recognized one as Jackson, the foreman, who had supervised Luis Rodriguez's hanging. "Afternoon, Bannister," Jackson called, a false heartiness in his voice. "Boss wanted us to check if you'd reconsidered his offer." Cole stopped in the middle of the trail, maintaining distance. "Already told Harrington my decision. Land's not for sale." Jackson spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Figured you'd say that. Stubborn sort." He nudged his horse forward. "Thing is, boss don't take no for an answer. Not from Yankees, especially." "Your boss fought for slavery and lost," Cole replied evenly. "Seems he's still having trouble with the concept of free choice." Jackson's face darkened. "Watch your mouth, Blue Belly. That's a great man you're disrespecting. Great men don't hang workers without trial." Cole stood his ground as the three riders spread out, slightly flanking him. "Or send thugs to intimidate homesteaders." "Intimidate?" Jackson affected offense. "We're just having a friendly chat, ain't we, boys?" His companions chuckled, hands resting near their weapons. Cole kept his voice level. "Chat's over. I have work to do." He made to step around them. Jackson's horse shifted, blocking his path. "Work might have to wait. Accidents happen, Bannister. Man alone building a cabin. Dangerous business. Falling hammers. Collapsing walls." His smile was ugly. "Would be terrible if you got pinned under something. Might not be found for days." "That a threat, Jackson? Just pointing out risks of frontier life." Jackson leaned forward in his saddle. 2,000 is generous. Take it and ride on. Plenty of land elsewhere for Yankees." Cole's patience evaporated. "Move aside or demonstrate whether you're as good with that gun as you are at hanging unarmed men." A tense silence followed, broken only by the creak of saddle leather as Jackson's companions shifted nervously. Jackson himself seemed taken aback by Cole's directness. "You threatening me, Bannister?" "Just pointing out risks of frontier life," Cole echoed. "Man makes enemies, pulls guns on folks who won't be cowed. Dangerous business." Jackson's face flushed with anger. For a moment, Cole thought he would draw. Instead, the foreman reined his horse around abruptly. "This ain't over," he snarled. "Nobody talks to Harrington's men that way. Nobody. Tell your boss I'm not selling," Cole called after them as they rode away. Not now, not ever. Only when the riders disappeared from view did Cole release the breath he'd been holding. The confrontation had been predictable, Harrington testing his resolve, but it confirmed that the situation would escalate. Jackson wasn't the type to accept public defiance without retaliation. Cole continued to his cabin senses, hyper-alert for further threats. The structure looked undisturbed, but he searched the interior thoroughly before setting down his revolver. Nothing seemed missing or tampered with. He spent the remainder of the day working on the cabin walls, fitting boards with methodical precision despite his troubled thoughts. Physical labor provided temporary distraction from the growing certainty that Redemption Valley would not easily yield the peace he sought. As dusk approached, Cole built a small fire outside and prepared a simple meal. The autumn evening was pleasantly cool, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue sky. He sat on the rough-hewn bench plate, balanced on his knees, and tried to appreciate the tranquility of the moment. A distant sound broke his reverie, the rhythmic pounding of approaching hooves moving fast. Cole set aside his plate and retrieved his rifle from inside the cabin, positioning himself in shadow as he had the previous morning. A lone rider appeared, horse lathered from hard riding. Even in the fading light, Cole recognized Caroline Bennett, her hair coming loose from its pins, her expression urgent as she reined in before the cabin. "Mr. Bannister," she called, dismounting swiftly. "Thank God you're here." Cole emerged, lowering his rifle. "Miss Bennett, what's happened?" Caroline was breathing hard, whether from exertion or emotion he couldn't tell. "There's no time to explain fully. You need to leave now. Tonight." She glanced over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. "Harrington knows who you are, what you did at Gettysburg." The cold weight that had settled in Cole's stomach at their previous conversation returned heavier now. How? I don't know. But he summoned me to his house after church, showed me a letter from someone who served with his son, someone who witnessed, she faltered, Lieutenant Robert Harrington's death, Cole finished quietly, at the hands of a Union soldier named Cole Bannister. Caroline's eyes widened. You knew, I suspected after our conversation last night. The name was familiar, but I couldn't be certain. I've carried that moment for 22 years, Miss Bennet. Cole's voice was steady despite the churning in his gut. Of all the men I killed in the war, that young lieutenant's face stayed with me. Then you understand why you must leave immediately. Caroline's voice was urgent. Harrington has already sent men to your property once today. He plans something worse tonight. Sarah overheard him ordering Jackson to make an example of you. Cole absorbed this information grimly. Did Sarah send you? Yes, she risked everything to warn you. Caroline grasped his arm. Please, Mr. Bannister. Harrington has waited 22 years to avenge his son. He won't stop until you're dead. Cole gently disengaged her hand. I'm not running, Miss Bennet. This isn't about courage, she protested. It's about survival. Harrington controls the sheriff. The courts, there's no justice to be found in redemption for Robert Harrington's killer. I killed his son in battle, Cole said quietly. Soldier against soldier. I've never denied that. But I won't run from it either. He looked toward the hills where the Harrington estate nestled. If he wants vengeance, let him come himself, not send hired guns in the night. Caroline stared at him, frustration evident in her expression. You're throwing your life away for pride. Not pride, Cole corrected. Something else. Something I've been seeking a long time. He turned back to her. But you should go. Being seen here puts you at risk. I'm already at risk, she replied with surprising calm. Harrington has suspected my feelings about my father's death for years. Sending Sarah to me with this warning proves he now considers me an enemy. She straightened her shoulders. I won't abandon you to face this alone, Mr. Bannister. Not when I led you into this danger. You didn't. His words were cut short by the sound of multiple horses approaching, still distant, but moving steadily toward the cabin. Caroline's face paled in the firelight. They're coming, she whispered. At least 4 riders, maybe more. Cole made a swift decision. Inside, he ordered, extinguishing the fire with a kick of dirt. Stay away from the windows. They retreated into the cabin where Cole quickly lit a lamp and placed it on the table. He checked his rifle and revolver methodically, then searched through his saddlebags until he found a small derringer. Take this, he said, offering the pocket pistol to Caroline. Last resort only. She accepted the weapon with steady hands, surprising him again. I know how to use it. Father believed women should be able to protect themselves. Cole moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. The approaching riders had slowed, moving cautiously now as they neared the property. 5 men, he reported quietly. Jackson and his crew from this morning, plus 2 others. He turned to Caroline, his expression grave. Whatever happens, stay inside. If it goes badly, there's a trap door under the bearskin rug. Root cellar beneath. Hide there until it's safe to leave. Caroline's eyes glistened in the lamplight, but her voice remained steady. They'll burn the cabin, Mr. Bannister, with both of us inside if they can. Then we'd better make sure they don't get the chance. Cole checked his weapons one final time, then moved to the door. Miss Bennet, Caroline, if I don't survive this, tell the truth. About Rodriguez, about your father, about all of it. Someone must know. I will, she promised, but it won't come to that. It can't. Cole smiled grimly. We'll see. He cracked the door, preparing to slip outside where he could meet the attackers on ground of his choosing. Caroline caught his arm. Cole, she said, using his first name for the first time, this isn't Gettysburg. You're not a soldier anymore, and this isn't a battlefield. You're wrong, he replied softly. Redemption Valley became a battlefield the moment Harrington decided some men's lives were worth less than others. "I've been fighting this war my whole life, one way or another." With that, he slipped into the darkness, leaving Caroline alone in the cabin as Jackson and his men approached through the trees, their intentions clear in the weapons they carried and the grim purpose in their movements. The peace Cole had sought in Redemption Valley would have to wait. Tonight, the ghosts of Gettysburg had followed him west for a reckoning long overdue. Moonlight silvered the landscape as Cole crouched behind the woodpile 30 yards from his cabin. His breath came slow and controlled, fogging slightly in the cool night air. He'd positioned himself to observe the approaching riders while keeping escape routes clear, an old soldier's habit that had saved his life more than once. Jackson and his men had dismounted at the edge of the clearing, tethering their horses to ensure the animals wouldn't bolt at the sound of gunfire. Now they advanced on foot, spreading out in a loose semicircle, two approaching the front door, while the others circled toward the rear. "Bannister," Jackson called, "step out and face justice for Lieutenant Harrington. Do it clean, and the woman doesn't have to get hurt." Cole remained silent. Let them wonder where he was. Uncertainty would make them hesitate, and hesitation would give him the edge he needed against superior numbers. A lantern flared as one of Jackson's men lit a torch. Cole tensed, suspicions confirmed. They meant to burn him out, or burn him alive, caring little if Caroline perished too. He raised his rifle, sighting carefully on the man with the torch. At this distance, in this light, it would be a difficult shot, but not impossible. His finger tightened on the trigger. A voice deep inside whispered, "Is this how it begins again? More killing." Cole hesitated, and in that moment, the cabin door burst open. Caroline stood framed in the doorway, derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. "Mr. Jackson?" she called, her voice remarkably steady. "Sheriff Tanner is on his way with Judge Foster from the county seat. They know I'm here, and they know why." Jackson paused, torch raised. "You're lying, woman. Tanner works for Harrington." "Sheriff Tanner works for the law," Caroline replied, "and Judge Foster answers to the territorial governor, not William Harrington. I sent a messenger to town before coming here, the same messenger who's been carrying my letters, documenting Harrington's threats and illegal activities for the past year." Cole silently cursed her recklessness while admiring her courage. She was bluffing, he was certain of it, but her confident tone gave Jackson pause. "Even if that's true," Jackson growled, "won't matter to Bannister. He killed the boss's son. Blood demands blood." "In war," Caroline countered, "would you hang every Confederate who killed a Union soldier, every Union man who shot a rebel? The war is over, Mr. Jackson. President Lincoln himself called for malice toward none, charity for all." "Lincoln's dead," Jackson spat, "and Harrington paid good money for justice." "He paid for murder," Caroline replied, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Just as he paid for my father's accident and Luis Rodriguez's trial. How much is your soul worth? Mr. Jackson, is Harrington paying enough?" Cole saw uncertainty ripple through Jackson's men. They'd signed on for a straightforward elimination of a troublesome homesteader, the kind of frontier justice that rarely saw investigation. Caroline had just complicated matters by invoking law witnesses and moral culpability. Jackson sensed his men's hesitation. "Enough talk," he barked. "Bannister's inside. Flush him out, or burn him out." He flung the torch onto the cabin's porch. The dry wood caught immediately, flames licking upward toward the eaves. Cole fired. His bullet struck Jackson's shoulder, spinning the man around with a howl of pain and surprise. The other men scattered for cover as Cole worked the lever action, chambering another round. "Next one's center mass," Cole shouted. "Clear out now, all of you!" Gunfire erupted as Jackson's men recovered from their surprise bullets splintering wood near Cole's position. He rolled away, firing twice more to keep them pinned down as he circled toward the cabin. The porch fire was spreading rapidly, threatening to engulf the entire structure. Caroline had disappeared from the doorway. Cole prayed she'd retreated to the root cellar as instructed. A bullet grazed his arm as he sprinted toward the cabin's rear. He returned fire without stopping. Satisfaction grim as one of Jackson's men cried out and fell. The back window of the cabin shattered outward. "Cole," Caroline called. "This way!" He changed direction, keeping low as he approached. Caroline helped him climb through the broken window into the smoke-filled interior. "We need to get out," he said, coughing. "Fire's spreading too fast." "The root cellar," she urged, pulling him toward the center of the cabin where she'd rolled back the bearskin rug to reveal a trapdoor. "It has an escape tunnel. Hiram showed me when I helped Martha after his death." Cole stared at her in surprise. "A tunnel?" Hiram was convinced Harrington would come for him eventually. He prepared. She yanked the trapdoor open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Quickly, outside, Jackson was shouting orders, his voice tight with pain. "Circle round! Don't let them escape!" Caroline descended first, Cole following after grabbing his saddlebags and rifle. He pulled the trapdoor shut above them just as booted feet stomped into the burning cabin. The root cellar was cool and earthen-smelling, illuminated only by a sliver of firelight seeping through the trapdoor cracks. Caroline fumbled in the darkness, then struck a match, lighting a stub of candle wedged in a wall niche. "This way," she whispered, leading him toward a narrow tunnel shored up with timber supports. "It emerges in the creek bed behind the stand of willows." They crawled through the passage, the sounds of the burning cabin and shouting men growing fainter behind them. The tunnel was barely wide enough for Cole's shoulders, forcing him to wriggle forward like a snake rifle dragging awkwardly alongside. "Did you really send a messenger to town?" he asked as they crawled. "No," she admitted, "but Jackson doesn't know that." Cole smiled despite their circumstances. Quick thinking. Father always said wit is a woman's best weapon when strength fails. The tunnel began to slope upward. "We're nearly there." Fresh air greeted them as they emerged through a cleverly disguised opening beneath a tangle of willow roots. The creek burbled softly nearby, and through the trees they could see the orange glow of the burning cabin. Cole helped Caroline to her feet, noting the tears in her dress and the smudges of dirt on her face. "You've saved my life, Miss Bennett, twice in one night." "Caroline," she corrected, brushing ineffectually at her skirt. "I think circumstances have moved us beyond formalities, Mr. Bannister."
Cole, he agreed, "though I fear your reputation won't survive being alone with me all night."
A wry smile touched her lips. "My reputation has survived worse. Being the sole female preacher in Wyoming territory teaches one to rise above gossip." She glanced toward the burning cabin. "Where will you go now?" "Not far," Cole replied grimly. "This isn't over." "You can't seriously intend to stay," Caroline protested. "Harrington will send more men, better men. He won't stop until you're dead." "Or until he is?" Cole checked his rifle, counting his remaining ammunition. "This has to end, Caroline. Not just for me, but for Rodriguez, your father, everyone who's suffered under Harrington's tyranny." "You're talking about killing him." It wasn't a question. Cole met her gaze in the firelight filtering through the trees. "I'm talking about justice, whatever form that takes." Caroline was silent for a long moment. "There's a line cabin on the Peterson ranch," she finally said. "Mr. Peterson mentioned it this morning, said you'd be welcome there if trouble came. It's 3 miles north beyond the ridge." "You should go to town," Cole suggested. "You'll be safer there." "I'm safer with you." Her voice was firm. "Harrington knows I helped you now. His men saw me at the cabin. If I return to town alone, I'll be at his mercy." Cole couldn't argue with her logic, though he disliked involving her further. "Very well, but we need to move quickly. Once Jackson realizes we've escaped, he'll search the surrounding area." They set off through the darkness, following the creek for a mile, before turning north toward the Peterson ranch. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. Under different circumstances, it might have been a pleasant evening walk. "Tell me about your father," Cole said, as they walked, partly to distract Caroline from their predicament, partly from genuine curiosity about the man whose moral courage still inspired such devotion. "Reverend Thomas Bennett," she began, a warmth entering her voice. "He came west after the war, believing the frontier needed spiritual guidance as much as civilization. He was unconventional, welcomed everyone to his church, miners, ranchers, Chinese railroad workers, even the Shoshone from the reservation." Her smile was audible in the darkness. "The church elders were scandalized, but Father said God didn't check papers at Heaven's Gate, so why should he at the church door? He sounds like a good man. The best," she affirmed. "After Mother died of fever when I was 16, he raised me alone, educated me himself when the Girls' Academy in Denver refused to teach Greek and Hebrew." Pride colored her words. He believed women could serve God's purpose as well as men, even if tradition disagreed. "Is that why you stayed?" Cole asked. "To continue his work?" Caroline was quiet for several steps. "Partly, but also because I couldn't bear to leave him buried in unconsecrated ground." Unconsecrated! The church committee, influenced by Harrington, refused to bury Father in the churchyard. They claimed his death by falling was possibly suicide, though anyone who knew him recognized the absurdity. Bitterness edged her voice. "He's buried on the hill behind the cottage under the oak tree, where he used to read his Bible." Cole absorbed this information silently, his respect for Caroline deepening. She had remained in a hostile environment surrounded by her father's killers to carry on his work and honor his memory. Such courage was rare. "And you?" she asked after a while. "What drove you west after the war?" Cole considered how much to reveal. "Ghosts," he finally said. "Too many to live with back east. Robert Harrington among them." "Yes, though not as you might think." Cole ducked beneath a low-hanging branch. "I didn't know his name when I shot him. He was just a Confederate officer raising his pistol, one of hundreds of life-or-death moments during the war." "Then why does he haunt you particularly?" Cole sighed. "Because of what I found after he fell. A locket with a woman's portrait, his mother, perhaps, or a sweetheart. I took it meaning to return it to him, but the battle moved on. Later, I sent it to my mother to forward to his family when the war ended." He shook his head. "My family was killed before she could do so. Sometimes I wonder if Harrington ever received that locket, if it would have mattered to him that his son's killer tried to return a cherished possession." "I doubt it would change his feelings now," Caroline said softly. "No? Some hatreds run too deep for gestures." Cole stopped suddenly, raising his hand for silence. "Listen." In the distance, the faint sound of horses reached them, Jackson's men spreading out to search. Cole pulled Caroline off the trail into a dense thicket, where they crouched in silence as riders passed nearby. "Check the ridge," one man was saying. "They can't have gone far, not with the woman along." "Jackson's bad hurt," another replied. "Bullet shattered his collarbone. Doc Thompson's with him now at the ranch." Harrington's offering $500 for Bannister dead or alive. $200 for the Bennett woman alive only. The voices faded as the riders moved on, but the implications of their words hung in the air. "He wants me alive," Caroline whispered, her voice tight with fear. "You know too much," Cole reasoned. "About your father, about Rodriguez. He'd want to know what you've told me, who else you've spoken to." "What you mean is he'd want to make an example of me." Caroline's voice was steady despite her words. "A public lesson about defying William Harrington." Cole didn't contradict her. "We need to keep moving. The Peterson place isn't far now." They continued north, moving more cautiously now, using the ridge to shield them from view. The Peterson Ranch lay in a small valley, its buildings dark and silent in the pre-dawn hours. The line cabin Caroline had mentioned stood separate from the main house, nestled against the hillside. As they approached, Cole sensed something wrong. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. He signaled Caroline to stay back, then moved forward silently, rifle ready. The interior was empty, but showed signs of recent occupation: coffee grounds on the table, a rumpled blanket on the narrow cot. Cole gestured Caroline inside, then closed and barred the door. "Someone's been here," he said, examining the room more thoroughly. "Recently. Peterson's cowhands, perhaps," Caroline suggested, sinking wearily onto a chair. "Perhaps." Cole didn't sound convinced. He found a lamp and lit it, adjusting the wick to provide minimal light. "Rest if you can. I'll keep watch." Caroline nodded, exhaustion evident in her slumped shoulders. She moved to the cot, but sat rather than lay down, as if reluctant to surrender completely to fatigue. Cole positioned himself by the window rifle across his knees, watching the approaches to the cabin. His wounded arm throbbed dully, but the graze was superficial, more annoying than dangerous. "Why did you really come to Redemption Valley?" Caroline asked softly, after a long silence. "Of all places." Cole considered the question. "Chance, mostly. Saw an advertisement in a Denver newspaper. The name appealed to me." "Just the name?" "After the war, I wore a badge in Kansas, Missouri, Colorado," he explained, eyes still scanning the darkness outside. "Tried to bring some kind of justice to lawless places. Kept moving when I saw that justice depended too much on who had money and who didn't." He smiled faintly. "Started to wonder if redemption was possible for a man who'd seen and done what I had." "And is it—" Her voice was gentle in the lamplight. "I don't know," Cole admitted, "but this valley seemed like a place to find out. Until Harrington." "Until Gettysburg caught up with you," Caroline corrected softly. Cole nodded. "Seems like I've been running from that battlefield for 22 years, only to end up facing it again here." "You could still leave," she suggested. "Start fresh somewhere. Harrington can't reach you." "And you, would you leave too?" Caroline looked down at her hands. "This is my home. My father's buried here. His work isn't finished." "Then neither is mine." Cole's voice was firm. "I'm tired of running, Caroline. Tired of watching men like Harrington crush anyone who stands in their way." Before she could respond, a sound outside froze them both. The soft nicker of a horse quickly hushed. Cole extinguished the lamp with a quick movement, then eased to the window, peering into the darkness. "Someone's out there," he whispered. "At least 2 men on foot now." Caroline rose silently, retrieving the derringer from her pocket. They waited, barely breathing, as soft footsteps approached the cabin. A gentle knock came at the door, followed by a whispered voice. "Miss Bennet, Mr. Bannister. It's Jacob Morgan." Cole exchanged a glance with Caroline, suspicion evident in his expression. She shook her head slightly, indicating her trust in the shopkeeper. "Could be forced," Cole mouthed silently. Another knock, slightly louder. "Please, if you're in there, Harrington's men are searching everywhere. We need to move quickly." Cole made a decision. "Step away from the door, hands visible," he called softly. "Just me and Sarah Washington," came the reply. "We're alone." Cole unbarred the door, cautiously, rifle ready. Jacob Morgan stood in the moonlight, hands raised as instructed. Beside him was the elderly black woman from Harrington's household, wrapped in a dark cloak. "Thank God," Jacob breathed. "We've been searching for hours." Cole lowered his rifle, allowing them inside before securing the door again. Caroline embraced Sarah with evident relief. "How did you find us?" Cole asked, still wary of a trap. "Sarah overheard Jackson's men reporting back to Harrington," Jacob explained, warming his hands over the stove Cole had relit. "Said they'd searched everywhere except the Peterson place. Wasn't hard to guess you might head here." "We had to come warn you," Sarah added, her dignified voice urgent. "You're not safe here."
Harrington's sent telegrams to Denver, Salt Lake City, and Cheyenne offering reward money for Mr. Bannister. He's calling in every favor, hiring every gun he can find. For one man, Cole asked incredulously. For his son's killer, Sarah corrected gently. I've known Mr. William since he was a boy in Virginia. Seen him through the war, the loss of his plantation, his wife's death. But nothing broke him like losing young Master Robert. She shook her head sadly. That hatred has consumed him for 22 years. He won't stop now. We need to get you both out of the territory, Jacob urged. I have a wagon hidden in the ravine. We can reach the Union Pacific line by tomorrow evening. From there you can be in California within days. Cole glanced at Caroline, whose expression remained resolute. I can't leave, she said, confirming what he already knew. My work is here. Your work will end with a rope if Harrington has his way, Jacob argued. He's telling people you conspired with Bannister to murder his men. Says you've been plotting against him since your father died. Let him say what he will. The truth will prevail. Truth needs witnesses, Miss Bennet, Sarah said softly. And Harrington is eliminating those one by one. The doctor who examined your father's body died last winter. The newspaper editor who questioned Rodriguez's hanging vanished on the road to Laramie. She took Caroline's hands in her weathered ones. You can't fight if you're dead, child. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Cole moved to the window again, scanning the darkness with practiced eyes. Why are you helping us, Sarah? You've served Harrington's family your whole life. I served the Harringtons when they were honorable, even if they were slaveholders, she replied with quiet dignity. What Mr. William has become since Master Robert died, that's not the family I served. She straightened her thin shoulders. Besides, Miss Caroline's father was kind to me when few others were. I pay my debts. Jacob cleared his throat. We should move soon before dawn. Harrington's men will return to search this area more thoroughly once it's light. Cole turned to Caroline. They're right. We need to leave at least temporarily. Regroup, gather evidence against Harrington, return with the law on our side. She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Very well, but I'll need to retrieve something from the cottage first. Too dangerous, Jacob protested. The cottage will be watched. My father's journals are hidden there, Caroline insisted. They contain everything. The church finances Harrington embezzled notes about threats made against Rodriguez and others, even observations from Gettysburg, that might prove Cole acted honorably in war. Her eyes were determined. Without those journals, it's our word against Harrington's. Cole considered their options. Where exactly are these journals hidden? Behind the loose brick in the fireplace. Father created the hiding place when he first suspected Harrington's corruption. I'll go, Cole decided. You three take the wagon toward the railroad. I'll retrieve the journals and catch up. Absolutely not, Caroline objected. You're the one with a price on your head. I know the hiding place I should go. And you're the one Harrington wants alive for questioning, Cole countered. If they catch you at the cottage, you'll wish they'd killed you instead. Sarah intervened before the argument could escalate. Neither of you should go alone, but together, perhaps with Jacob and me creating a diversion. What kind of diversion? Jacob asked warily. Sarah's expression grew calculating. Mr. William trusts me completely. Has for decades. If I return now, claiming to have information about Miss Caroline's whereabouts, I could draw attention away from the cottage. Too risky, Cole said. If Harrington suspects your loyalty, he won't, Sarah interrupted confidently. Not if I tell him I'm trying to protect him from scandal. That I've discovered Miss Caroline plans to expose his personal indiscretions with me. The others stared at her in shock. Sarah, Caroline gasped. You can't possibly. Child, I'm 73 years old. My reputation means nothing compared to your safety. Sarah's dignity never wavered. Besides, it's not entirely false.
When Mrs. Harrington died, Mr. William did seek comfort. The arrangement ended years ago, but he'd never want it known. Cole's respect for the elderly woman increased enormously. "You'd risk that much for us." "For justice," Sarah corrected, "and for Reverend Bennett, who treated me as a human being when others saw only color." She turned to Jacob. "You'll need to create a second diversion on the south side of town. A fire, perhaps, in one of the abandoned mining shacks." Jacob nodded slowly. "That could work. Draw the sheriff and his deputies away while you two slip into the cottage." They spent the next hour refining the plan, synchronizing their movements by pocket watches. As dawn approached, they left the line cabin separately, Jacob and Sarah heading directly to town, while Cole and Caroline circled wide around the Peterson ranch to approach Redemption from the north. They traveled in silence through the pale morning light, keeping to ravines and wooded areas to avoid being spotted. Cole noticed Caroline stumbling occasionally, exhaustion evident in her movements, but she never complained. By mid-morning, they had reached the wooded hills overlooking Redemption. From their vantage point, they could see the town stirring to life, shopkeepers opening their doors, miners heading toward the Harrington coal works, a rider galloping down the main street whom Cole recognized as Sheriff Tanner. "Something's happening," Cole observed. "Tanner's in a hurry." Caroline squinted at the distant scene. "The church committee meets Monday mornings. Perhaps news of my treachery has reached them." "Your absence will have been noted by now," Cole agreed. "We'll need to wait until the diversions begin before approaching the cottage." They found a sheltered hollow to rest, sharing the meager provisions Jacob had provided: jerky hardtack and a canteen of water. Caroline dozed briefly, her head nodding forward, before she jerked awake again, embarrassed. "Sleep," Cole encouraged. "We have hours yet before Sarah's diversion." "I'll keep watch later so you can rest too," she insisted, but within minutes her eyes had closed, her breathing deepening as exhaustion claimed her. Cole watched her sleep, struck by the contrast between her serene features in repose and the steel-spined determination she had shown since he met her. Few men he'd known possessed such courage, let alone a woman raised for gentility. His thoughts turned to the journals they sought. If Reverend Bennett had indeed documented Harrington's crimes over the years, they might have the evidence needed to bring the man to justice through legal means. Cole preferred that option to the alternative, a violent confrontation that would likely end with more bloodshed, more ghosts to haunt his dreams. The sun climbed higher, warming the autumn air. In the distance, Redemption appeared peaceful, giving no hint of the corruption festering beneath its surface. Cole's gaze drifted to the white church on the hill, the graveyard beside it, the cottage where Reverend Bennett had once lived and died. Had the minister known when he documented Harrington's misdeeds that he was signing his own death warrant? And had he done it anyway, believing that truth must eventually prevail? Cole looked again at Caroline, understanding better now the source of her courage. She was her father's daughter, willing to risk everything for justice and principle. The realization stirred something long dormant in Cole's chest, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival, beyond the next town or the next job. For 22 years, he had drifted without roots or connections, haunted by the war, by the men he'd killed both as soldier and lawman. Now, watching over this extraordinary woman in the Wyoming wilderness, he felt an unexpected clarity. If redemption was possible for a man like him, perhaps it began here, not in running from his past, but in standing firm to protect those who fought for right, despite the cost. Around noon, Cole gently woke Caroline. They ate a sparse meal, then reviewed their plan once more as they waited for the appointed hour. At precisely 2 o'clock, they would begin their approach to the cottage, timing their arrival to coincide with Sarah's diversion at the Harrington estate and Jacob's fire at the abandoned mine shack. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Cole asked as the time drew near. "There's still a place on that train west for you." Caroline's expression was serene, but determined. My father gave his life for the truth, Mr. Bannister. I can risk no less.
Cole, he reminded her. After all this, I think we're beyond Mr. Bannister.
A smile briefly illuminated her face. Cole, then. She hesitated, then added, if we succeed, if we recover the journals and expose Harrington, what will you do? Return to drifting. The question caught him off guard. He had been so focused on immediate survival that he hadn't considered what might come after. I don't know, he admitted. Depends on whether there's reason to stay, I suppose. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of possibility neither was ready to acknowledge directly. Caroline looked away, first adjusting her torn and dirty dress, with an attempt at dignity that Cole found unexpectedly moving. It's time, he said, checking his pocket watch. Ready? She nodded, and together they began their careful descent toward redemption, unaware that events in town had already spiraled beyond their carefully laid plans. Sheriff Tanner stood on the church steps addressing a hastily gathered crowd of concerned citizens. His voice carried clearly in the still afternoon air. Harboring a known killer, he was saying as Cole and Caroline drew close enough to hear. William Harrington has sworn out formal charges against Caroline Bennett for conspiracy to commit murder harboring a fugitive and sedition against the properly established authorities of Redemption Valley. Murmurs ran through the crowd, some supportive of Caroline, others condemning. Furthermore, Tanner continued, evidence has been discovered linking Reverend Bennett's death 3 years ago to an ongoing conspiracy against the economic development of our community. Documents found in the cottage reveal a plot involving several community members, including the late Hiram Stevens. That's a lie. Jacob Morgan's voice rose above the crowd. Caroline Bennett is the most honest person in this valley, and her father was a saint.
Arrest that man, Tanner ordered, pointing at Jacob, for interfering with justice and suspected involvement in the conspiracy. 2 deputies moved toward Jacob, who stood his ground defiantly. From their hiding place at the edge of town, Cole and Caroline watched in horror as their ally was seized roughly. They've been in the cottage already, Caroline whispered, dismay evident in her voice. They have the journals. Not necessarily, Cole replied, studying the scene carefully. Tanner mentioned documents, but he's being vague about specifics. Could be bluffing, trying to flush us out. What do we do now? Before Cole could answer, a commotion erupted at the far end of town. Smoke billowed from one of the abandoned mine shacks, Jacob's diversion, right on schedule, despite his arrest. Fire! Someone shouted. The old Watson place is burning. The crowd's attention shifted immediately, many rushing toward the blaze. Sheriff Tanner hesitated, torn between maintaining control of his meeting and responding to the emergency. This is our chance, Cole murmured, while they're distracted. They slipped from their hiding place, keeping to shadows and alleyways, as they worked their way toward the cottage. The structure stood dark and silent, apparently unguarded in the confusion. Caroline led Cole to a rear window, which yielded to her push. She had deliberately left it unlocked for emergencies. They climbed inside quietly, finding themselves in a small kitchen. The fireplace is in the front room, Caroline whispered, moving confidently despite the dim interior. They entered the main room of the cottage, where a stone fireplace dominated one wall. Caroline knelt before it, reaching up into the chimney to locate the loose brick her father had shown her years ago. It's gone, she said after a moment, voice tight with dismay. The brick is loose, but the space behind it is empty. Cole examined the fireplace more carefully, noting scuff marks on the hearth. Someone else knew about this hiding place. Recently, too, these marks are fresh. A floorboard creaked behind them. Cole whirled, drawing his revolver, but too late. Sheriff Tanner stood in the doorway, shotgun leveled at Cole's chest. Behind him, William Harrington stepped into view, a leather-bound journal in his hands. Looking for this Miss Bennett? Harrington asked, holding up the book. Fascinating reading. Your father had quite the imagination, accusing me of all manner of crimes without a shred of actual evidence. He smiled coldly.
Just the deluded ramblings of a man who lost his mind after losing his wife. My father was of sound mind and character, Caroline replied, rising to her feet with dignity. Unlike some who claim to be gentlemen while ordering murders and theft. Strong accusations from a woman harboring her father's killer, Harrington replied smoothly. Cole kept his revolver trained on Tanner, though he knew the shotgun gave the sheriff the advantage. Her father's killer stands before us holding the evidence of his crime. Poetic, Mr. Bannister, but legally meaningless. Harrington's smile never reached his eyes. Sheriff Tanner has sworn statements from multiple witnesses that you and Miss Bennett conspired to murder my foreman Jackson last night, that you've been plotting against me since your arrival, that Miss Bennett has been using her position as the town's spiritual advisor to turn the community against legitimate business interests. No one will believe such obvious lies, Caroline declared. They'll believe what the law tells them to believe, Tanner growled. Drop the gun, Bannister. You're under arrest for the murder of Luis Rodriguez, attempted murder of Jackson Hayes, and conspiracy against the peace of Redemption Valley. And what about Gettysburg? Cole asked quietly, eyes on Harrington. Am I to be tried for that, too, for doing my duty as a soldier? Something twisted in Harrington's expression. Grief or rage, perhaps both. My son was barely 20, had his whole life ahead of him. A fine Virginia gentleman cut down by a Yankee butcher. Your son died a soldier's death facing his enemy, Cole replied evenly. A better end than Luis Rodriguez hanged without trial, or Reverend Bennett pushed from a roof, or Hiram Stevens, whose heart conveniently gave out after threats to his wife. You know nothing about my son. Harrington's composure cracked slightly. Nothing about what was lost when he died? I know he carried a locket with a woman's portrait, Cole said softly. I know I tried to return it to his family after the war. Harrington froze, genuine shock, replacing anger. What did you say? A gold locket oval with filigree work. Inside a miniature portrait of a woman with dark hair and eyes. Your wife, I presume. The color drained from Harrington's face. You took that from Robert's body. To return it, Cole emphasized. I sent it to my mother to forward to your family when the war ended. But my family was killed before she could do so. For a moment, something almost human flickered in Harrington's eyes, a grief not hardened by hatred. Then his expression closed again, colder than before. A convenient story impossible to verify, he nodded to Tanner. Take them both to the jail. The territorial judge arrives tomorrow. We'll have a proper trial before a proper hanging. As Tanner moved to handcuff them, a gunshot cracked outside, followed by shouts, and the sound of running feet. Sheriff, a voice called. We got trouble. The fire's spreading to the mine office and someone's busted Morgan out of the lockup. Tanner hesitated, shotgun still trained on Cole. Damn it all to hell. Harrington, watch these two. I need to handle this. With pleasure, Harrington replied, drawing a small pistol from his coat pocket. We have unfinished business anyway, Mr. Bannister. The sheriff hurried out, leaving Cole and Caroline alone with William Harrington and his revolver. 22 years I've waited for justice, Harrington said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Imagined 100 ways to kill the man who took my son. And now here you are, delivered to me like divine providence. There's been enough killing, Caroline interjected, stepping forward despite Cole's warning gesture. The war is over. Robert wouldn't want— Don't you dare speak his name! Harrington's control shattered completely, his aristocratic facade crumbling to reveal naked hatred. You know nothing about my son, or what he would want. I know he was a soldier who died with honor. Caroline persisted, moving closer despite the weapon pointed at her. Not a victim to be avenged through murder and corruption. Caroline, stay back, Cole warned, seeing the dangerous gleam in Harrington's eyes. Listen to him, Miss Bennett. Harrington advised, his voice deadly calm again.
Step aside or I'll kill you first and make him watch. You'll have to shoot me, she replied steadily. I won't stand by while you murder an innocent man for doing his duty in war. Cole tensed, ready to lunge forward if Harrington's finger tightened on the trigger. But before any of them could move, the cottage door burst open again. Sarah Washington stood in the doorway, a shotgun in her weathered hands. That's enough, Mr. William. Harrington's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Sarah, what are you doing? What I should have done years ago. The elderly woman's voice was steady, her grip on the shotgun unwavering. Put down that gun. These killings stop now. You're betraying me after all these years? Incredulity colored Harrington's tone. For these Yankees? I'm choosing right over wrong, Sarah replied simply. Something you used to understand before grief poisoned your soul. For a moment, the cottage was silent except for the distant shouts as townspeople battled the spreading fire. Then Harrington laughed, a hollow, terrible sound. Et tu, Sarah, he said softly. Very well. Perhaps it's fitting that my most loyal servant delivers the final betrayal. His finger tightened on the trigger. But if I'm to meet Robert in the hereafter, I'll not go alone. 3 gunshots shattered the afternoon quiet so close together they sounded almost as one. Gun smoke hung in the air, acrid and thick. Cole found himself on the floor, having lunged toward Caroline as the shots rang out. He'd pulled her down with him, covering her body with his own. For a moment, silence reigned. Then came a soft thud, the sound of a body falling. Cole raised his head cautiously. William Harrington lay sprawled on the cottage floor, blood spreading across his immaculate waistcoat. His eye, Itzy, stared sightlessly at the ceiling, the revolver still clutched in his lifeless hand. Sarah Washington stood in the doorway, shotgun lowered her weathered face, impassive. A thin trickle of blood ran down her left arm where Harrington's bullet had grazed her, before her own shot found its mark. Sarah! Caroline struggled to her feet, shock evident in her expression. You killed him! He was going to kill you both, Sarah replied simply. She set the shotgun against the wall with trembling hands. I couldn't allow that. Cole moved to Harrington's body, confirming what he already knew. The shotgun blast had caught the man squarely in the chest. Death had been instantaneous. We need to leave, he said urgently. Tanner will return any minute. And go where? Caroline asked, still staring at Harrington's body. The entire territory will be after us now. Not necessarily. Sarah retrieved the journal from where it had fallen near Harrington's outstretched hand. This contains the truth about everything: the embezzled church, funds, the threats against Hiram Stevens, your father's suspicions about Rodriguez. With Harrington dead, others may be willing to speak now. Or they may blame us for his death and hang us all without a hearing, Cole countered. He moved to the window, scanning the street. The fire's spreading. Most of the town is fighting it, but it won't be long before someone comes to report to Harrington. Sarah straightened her shoulders, decision hardening her features. You two need to go. I'll stay. Absolutely not, Caroline protested. You'll be arrested, possibly hanged. I'm an old woman who's lived her life, Sarah replied with quiet dignity. And I have a story they'll believe. Mr. William threatened you, tried to force himself on Miss Caroline. I've been cleaning my shotgun, heard the commotion, and acted to protect a young woman's virtue. She nodded toward the shotgun. It's my weapon, kept in this cottage since Reverend Bennett's day. Everyone knows that. Cole studied her with newfound respect. They might still hang you. They might, Sarah acknowledged. But an elderly colored woman defending a white woman's honor, even in Wyoming, that carries weight. And I have friends, people Mr. William never noticed because their skin was dark or their accents foreign. They'll speak for me. Caroline embraced the older woman. I can't let you sacrifice yourself for us. Child, I made my choice when I pulled this trigger. Sarah gently disengaged from Caroline's arms. Take the journal.
Find Judge Foster in Laramie. He's a fair man who never liked Harrington's methods. She pressed the leather-bound book into Caroline's hands. Go, through the back. Most everyone's at the fire. The sound of voices outside made the decision for them. Cole took Caroline's arm, guiding her toward the rear of the cottage. At the door, he turned back to Sarah. Thank you, he said simply. The elderly woman nodded once. Do right by her, she replied, just as simply. They slipped out the back door and into the gathering dusk. The town's attention remained focused on the fire, which had indeed spread from the abandoned mine shack to the mine office and now threatened nearby buildings. Shouts and the splash of bucket brigades created enough chaos to cover their escape. Cole led Caroline through back alleys toward the livery stable. We need horses, he said in a low voice. And supplies. The stablemaster is Harrington's man, Caroline warned. Then we'll have to be persuasive. The livery was deserted, its owner presumably helping fight the fire. Cole quickly saddled 2 horses, while Caroline gathered saddlebags and basic provisions stored in a side room. Head north, Cole instructed as they mounted up. Stay off the main trails. I know a place in the mountains where we can lay low until it's safe to reach Laramie. They rode out of town as darkness fell, the glow of the fire behind them casting long shadows ahead. Neither spoke until Redemption Valley was well behind them, the night enfolding them in its protective darkness. Do you think Sarah will be all right? Caroline finally asked, her voice small against the vastness of the Wyoming night. I don't know, Cole admitted. She's either very brave or very foolish, maybe both. She loved him once, Caroline said softly. She told me that while you were keeping watch this morning. Said the young William Harrington had been a good man before the war, before losing his son twisted something in him. Cole considered this as they rode. War changes men. Some heal afterward, others never do. And you? Caroline's question hung in the night air between them. Have you healed Cole Bannister? He was silent for a long moment. I'm trying, he finally said. For the first time in a long while, I'm trying. They pushed on through the night, climbing steadily into the mountains northeast of Redemption. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through particularly difficult stretches. Caroline never complained, though Cole could see exhaustion etched in every line of her body. Near dawn, they reached Cole's destination, a small hunting cabin nestled in a high mountain meadow overlooking the valley below. The structure was crude but sound, with a stone fireplace and single room containing a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Trapper I knew in Denver mentioned this place, Cole explained as he unsaddled the horses. Said he used it during winter hunts but abandoned it years ago. Should be safe enough for now. Caroline nodded wearily, all but swaying on her feet. Cole helped her inside, where she sank onto the cot without protest. Within moments, she was asleep, still in her torn and dirty dress, the journal clutched to her chest. Cole built a small fire in the fireplace, careful to use dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. Then he took stock of their situation. The provisions Caroline had grabbed were basic but adequate: jerky coffee flour, some canned goods. With careful rationing and supplemented by hunting, they could last 2 weeks or more. He stepped outside to check their back trail as the sun crested the eastern mountains. From this elevation, he could see for miles. Redemption Valley lay peaceful in the distance, showing no sign of the previous night's drama. No dust clouds indicated pursuit yet. Exhaustion swept over him suddenly, the events of the past 2 days catching up at once. Cole returned to the cabin and settled into one of the chairs, rifle across his knees. He meant to stay awake, to keep watch, but sleep claimed him within minutes. He woke with a start, hours later, disoriented. The cabin was warmer now, sunlight streaming through the single window. Caroline was no longer on the cot. Cole bolted upright, reaching for his rifle, only to find her sitting at the table. She had changed into clothes, apparently found in the cabin, a man's shirt tucked into her skirt, and was reading the journal by the light from the window. You should have woken me, he said, voice rough with sleep. She looked up, a small smile touching her lips. You needed rest, and I was perfectly safe. She gestured to the open doorway where their horses grazed peacefully in the meadow. No sign of pursuit. Cole joined her at the table, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. Find anything useful in your father's journal? More than I expected. Caroline turned the book so he could see the neat, precise handwriting filling its pages. Father documented everything, dates, amounts, witnesses. The church funds Harrington embezzled, threats against homesteaders who refused to sell, even conversations with men who later died in accidents. Enough to convince a judge, more than enough, I think. She turned to a specific page. And there's something else, something about you, or at least, I believe it's about you. Cole leaned forward, puzzled. Caroline pointed to an entry dated July 8, 1863, just days after the Battle of Gettysburg. Today, I ministered to a young sergeant from Illinois who saved my life during the Confederate assault. When shell fragments struck me, he carried me to safety despite risk to himself. The man Bannister by name confessed he had killed a Virginia lieutenant the previous day and was tormented by the act, though it was clearly self-defense. The lieutenant had raised his weapon first. Bannister showed me a locket taken from the dead officer, which he intends to return to the man's family when opportunity allows. Such humanity amid the brutality of war gives me hope for reconciliation once this terrible conflict ends. Cole stared at the words, memories rushing back. The chaplain he'd helped, a tall man with kind eyes and a quiet voice. He'd forgotten the brief encounter amid the chaos of battle's aftermath, but now the recollection returned with surprising clarity. Your father, he said softly. I remember him. Shell burst nearby as he was tending wounded. I didn't know his name. And he apparently never learned yours fully, Caroline replied. Just Bannister from Illinois. But he never forgot your act of kindness. She touched the page gently. Or your regret over Lieutenant Harrington's death. Cole absorbed this unexpected connection. Your father wrote that I killed Harrington in self-defense. Yes, and as a man of God, his testimony carries weight. Caroline met his gaze steadily. You've carried this guilt for 22 years, Cole. Perhaps it's time to set it down. Before he could respond, movement in the valley below caught his attention. Cole moved to the window, shielding his eyes against the sun's glare. Riders, he said tensely. At least 6, maybe more, following our trail. Caroline joined him at the window. Sheriff Tanner, probably. They're still miles away, but they're heading in the right direction. Cole calculated quickly. We have a few hours at most before they reach us. We could try to reach Laramie, Caroline suggested. It's only a day's hard ride east. Cole shook his head. They'd catch us in the open. This cabin is defensible at least. Against 6 armed men. Caroline's voice held no fear, only pragmatic assessment. Even with both of us shooting, those aren't favorable odds. Who said anything about shooting? Cole smiled grimly. I've had my fill of killing, Caroline. There has to be another way. They spent the next hour in urgent preparation. Cole reinforced the cabin door while Caroline inventoried their supplies and loaded both his revolver and her derringer. They filled every available container with water from the nearby spring, brought the horses closer, and gathered extra firewood. As the riders drew nearer, visible now as they wound their way up the mountain trail, Cole made a final inspection of their defenses. Remember, he told Caroline, we're not trying to fight our way out. We just need to hold them off until nightfall. Then we can slip away through the back trail I found. And if they surround us completely, then we'll have to improvise. Cole checked his pocket watch. They'll be here within the hour. Are you sure you want to go through with this? There's still time for you to take one horse and head east while I delay them. Caroline's expression was serene but determined. My place is here with the truth." She patted the journal now secured inside her clothing. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Cole studied her face, marveling again at her courage. In the soft mountain light, with her auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders and determination brightening her green eyes, she was breathtaking. "Caroline," he began hesitantly, "if we get through this—" A gunshot interrupted him, the bullet splintering the window frame inches from his head. Cole pulled Caroline down as more shots followed. "That's far enough, Bannister." Sheriff Tanner's voice carried clearly in the mountain air. "We have the cabin surrounded. Come out with your hands up and bring the Bennett woman with you." Cole peered cautiously through a crack in the shutters. Tanner and his men had taken positions behind rocks and trees, their rifles trained on the cabin. He counted 8 men, total poor odds indeed. "What do you want, Tanner?" Cole called back. "Justice for William Harrington," the sheriff replied, "and for Luis Rodriguez and Jackson Hayes. You're wanted for murder, Bannister, and the Bennett woman for conspiracy." "What about Sarah Washington?" Caroline asked quietly. Cole relayed the question, and Tanner's response was grim. "The old woman confessed to shooting Harrington, claimed it was to protect Miss Bennett's virtue. She's in jail, awaiting the judge, but that doesn't clear either of you." A pause. Then, "You've got 1 minute to surrender, or we start burning you out." Cole and Caroline exchanged glances. Their plan to hold out until nightfall wouldn't work if Tanner set fire to the cabin. "We need that journal to reach Judge Foster," Caroline whispered urgently. "Without it, Sarah will hang for certain, and Harrington's crimes will remain buried." Cole nodded, mind racing. "We surrender, they'll separate us immediately. Take us back to Redemption for a show trial, then a hanging." He glanced around the cabin, searching for options. "If I create a distraction, could you make it to the back trail?" "Not without you," Caroline insisted. "Someone has to reach the judge with that journal," Cole argued. "Better you than me. I'm already condemned in their eyes." "No," Caroline's voice was firm. "There must be another way." Another volley of shots hit the cabin, one bullet penetrating the thin walls and embedding itself in the table. Their time was running out. "30 seconds, Bannister!" Tanner shouted. "We've got coal oil ready." Cole made a swift decision. "When I say run, head for the back trail. Don't argue, don't look back, just run." He moved to the fireplace, gathering the remaining coffee grounds and a handful of the driest kindling. "What are you doing?" Caroline asked. "Creating cover." Cole dumped the coffee grounds onto the fire, generating a thick, acrid smoke that quickly filled the cabin and began seeping through the bullet holes in the walls and roof. Next, he added the kindling, creating a brief but intense flare. "Time's up," Tanner called. "Boys, douse that cabin." "Now," Cole hissed, throwing open the rear door. "Run!" Caroline hesitated only briefly before darting through the door, staying low as Cole had instructed. He followed immediately, pausing only to fling more kindling onto the fire, creating a larger smoke screen. They sprinted for the narrow game trail Cole had discovered earlier, keeping the cabin between themselves and Tanner's men. Shouts of confusion rose as smoke poured from the cabin, temporarily obscuring the posse's view. "They're out the back," someone yelled belatedly. Gunfire erupted again, bullets whining overhead and thudding into trees as Cole and Caroline plunged into the dense forest beyond the meadow. The game trail wound steeply downward, too narrow and treacherous for horses. They descended rapidly, half running, half sliding down the rocky path. Behind them, they could hear Tanner organizing his men for pursuit. "They'll have to go around," Cole gasped, as they paused briefly to catch their breath. "This trail's too dangerous for horses, and they won't abandon their mounts. Gives us maybe 30 minutes head start." Caroline nodded too, winded to speak. Her face was scratched from branches, her borrowed shirt torn at the shoulder, but determination still burned in her eyes. They continued downward the trail, eventually widening as it joined an old logging road. Here they were more exposed, but could move faster. Cole set a grueling pace, aware that every minute counted. "Where are we heading?" Caroline finally asked when they paused again at a stream to drink. "There's an old mining camp about 5 miles east," Cole replied, filling his hat with water. "Abandoned after the silver played out. If we can reach it, we might find horses, or at least better shelter than that cabin. And from there, Laramie, Judge Foster, the truth." Cole handed her his hat. "Drink. We've got a hard road ahead." Caroline drank deeply, then splashed water on her face. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not leaving me behind." "Never crossed my mind," Cole admitted, though it probably should have. A faint smile touched her lips. "Probably." They set off again, the logging road gradually descending toward a wider valley. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and both were soon drenched in sweat. Cole watched Caroline carefully for signs of exhaustion, but she matched his pace without complaint. As they rounded a bend, Cole raised his hand for a halt. Ahead, the logging road joined a wider trail, and fresh hoofprints marked the dust. "Someone's been through here recently," he murmured, examining the tracks. "Multiple riders heading east." "Tanner's men?" Caroline asked anxiously. "Don't think so. These tracks are coming from a different direction." Cole frowned. "Could be Harrington's men from outlying ranches summoned after his death. Or just travelers. Either way, we need to be careful." They proceeded more cautiously, Cole leading them off the trail into the tree line where they could travel concealed. Progress was slower but safer, and they continued steadily eastward. The sun was low when they finally spotted the abandoned mining camp, a cluster of dilapidated buildings nestled in a narrow canyon. Cole studied it through narrowed eyes, noting signs of recent occupation smoke rising from one chimney horses in the crude corral. "Someone's there," he whispered, pulling Caroline behind a fallen tree for cover. "At least 3 or 4 men based on the horses." "Tanner couldn't have gotten ahead of us," Caroline reasoned. "Who else would be using this place?" Cole shook his head. "Could be anyone. Prospectors, outlaws, hunters. Wyoming's full of men looking to avoid attention." He considered their options. "We'll circle around, try to get a better look before approaching." They worked their way through the underbrush until they had a clearer view of the camp's main building, a large cabin that had once served as the mining company office. 4 men sat outside on a rough porch, passing a bottle between them. Their horses' good stock, Cole noted, stood saddled in the corral as if the riders expected to depart at any moment. "I don't recognize them from Redemption," Caroline whispered. "No," Cole agreed. "But I've seen men like them before, hired guns waiting for someone." A cold certainty settled in his gut. Harrington must have telegraphed for reinforcements before confronting us at the cottage. These men just don't know their employer is dead yet. "What do we do?" Before Cole could answer, a horse whinnied behind them. They turned to find themselves staring down the barrel of a rifle held by a hard-faced man in trail-worn clothing. "Well now," the man drawled, "what have we here? You folks lost, or just naturally curious about other people's business?" Cole kept his hands visible, mind racing. "Just passing through. Saw the camp, thought we'd see if anyone was willing to trade supplies." The man spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Passing through mighty quiet-like for honest folk." His eyes narrowed. "Stand up. Slow." They complied, and the man whistled sharply. His companions on the porch looked up, then hurried toward them, hands on weapons. "Look what I found sneaking around, boys," their captor announced as the others arrived. Man and a woman watching the camp. One of the newcomers, a stocky, bearded man with cold eyes, studied them intently. "Well, I'll be damned. Bannister and the Bennett woman, unless I miss my guess." He grinned unpleasantly. "Harrington's telegram said we'd be well paid for bringing you 2 in." Cole tensed, ready to make a desperate move, but 4 guns now pointed at them. The odds were impossible. "Tie 'em up," the bearded man ordered. "Jackson should be here by dark. He'll want to handle this personally."
Cole and Caroline exchanged alarmed glances. Jackson was supposed to be recovering from his wound at the Harrington Ranch. If he was coming here, it could only mean one thing: Tanner had sent word about Harrington's death, and Jackson was taking command. They were marched into the main cabin, where their hands were bound behind them and they were forced onto separate stools near the cold fireplace. The bearded man, who introduced himself as Grady, seemed to be in charge of the hired guns. $500 for Bannister, $200 for the woman, Grady informed his men as he checked the bindings. Plus whatever bounty the territorial governor adds for Harrington's murder. Not bad for a few days' work. "We didn't kill Harrington," Caroline protested. "Sarah Washington did, and she's already confessed." Grady shrugged. "Don't much care who pulled the trigger, ma'am. My job's just to deliver you to Jackson, and he ain't particular about the details." He examined her more closely. "Though I might suggest we deliver you a bit worse for wear. Payment for the trouble you've caused." Cole strained against his bonds. "Touch her, and you're dead." A cold laugh answered him. "Bold talk for a man tied to a stool." Grady turned to his men. "Two of you guard the prisoners. Dixon, watch the trail for Jackson. Lester, see about some food. Might be our last hot meal for a while once we start back to redemption." The men dispersed to their tasks, leaving Cole and Caroline under the watch of two guards, who settled at a table across the room starting a desultory card game. "I'm sorry," Cole murmured when the guards seemed sufficiently distracted. "Should have been more careful approaching the camp." "Not your fault," Caroline replied softly. "We were running out of options." She tested her bindings surreptitiously. "These are tight. Can you work free?" Cole flexed his wrists cautiously. "Given enough time, maybe. But we don't have much of that. Once Jackson arrives..." He left the sentence unfinished. They both knew what Jackson's arrival would mean. The foreman had been humiliated by Cole's bullet and would be seeking revenge, especially now that Harrington was dead and couldn't restrain him. "The journal," Caroline whispered. "It's still inside my shirt. If we can't escape, we need to get it to Judge Foster somehow." Cole nodded grimly. "One problem at a time. First, we need to..." The cabin door banged open, and the man called Dixon rushed in. "Ryder's coming," he announced. "Looks like Jackson, but there's someone else with him. A woman, I think." Grady frowned. "Jackson didn't mention bringing anyone else." The guards abandoned their card game, moving to the window. Cole exchanged a quick glance with Caroline, then began working more urgently at his bonds, using the distraction to his advantage. Outside, horses clattered into the clearing. Male voices called greetings, followed by the sound of dismounting riders. Cole worked a finger beneath the rope, finding a slight looseness that might, with time and effort, allow him to slip free. The cabin door opened again. Jackson entered first, his left arm in a sling, his face haggard with pain, but eyes gleaming with malevolent satisfaction as they fell on Cole. "Bannister," he growled. "Been looking forward to settling our score." "Jackson," Cole acknowledged coolly, still working at his bonds. "Shoulder, giving you trouble." "Sunt." The foreman's face darkened. "Not as much trouble as you're about to have." He turned to Grady. "You've done good work. Payment as agreed, plus a bonus." He tossed a leather pouch that clinked heavily with coins. "Always a pleasure doing business," Grady replied, weighing the pouch appreciatively. "What about the woman?" "She hangs alongside him," Jackson said flatly. "Sheriff's orders." "Seems a waste," Grady observed, eyeing Caroline. "Pretty thing like that." Jackson's expression hardened. "She's not to be touched. Sheriff wants her intact for the trial." He glanced toward the door. "Bring her in." Cole's blood ran cold. Had they captured someone else? Another ally? The door opened wider, and a figure stepped through, a woman in a gray traveling dress, her face partially concealed by a bonnet. As she raised her head, Cole's confusion turned to shock. It was Sarah Washington, but not as he had last seen her.
The dignified older woman now stood straight-backed and imperious, her expression coldly triumphant, as her gaze swept over Cole and Caroline. "Well done, Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice carrying none of the subservient tone she had used in Harrington's house. "You've captured our murderers exactly as promised." "Sarah," Caroline's voice broke on the name. "What is this? You were arrested." "Was I—" Sarah removed her bonnet, revealing gray hair, arranged in an elegant style Cole had never seen her wear before. How convenient that everyone believed so. "I don't understand," Caroline whispered. "You killed Harrington to save us. You confessed." "I killed William because he had become a liability," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "As for my confession, Sheriff Tanner knows better than to arrest me. He works for me now just as he worked for William before." Cole stared at the elderly woman, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "You," he said softly, "you've been behind Harrington all along." Sarah's smile was terrible in its satisfaction. "Not behind him, Mr. Bannister. Beside him, guiding him, using his grief and hatred to build an empire neither of us could have created alone." She moved further into the room, her bearing regal. "Did you really think a former slave could become a mere housekeeper, that I would spend decades in servitude without purpose?" "You loved him," Caroline protested. "You told me I used him," Sarah corrected coldly, "just as he used me. Our arrangement was mutually beneficial until his obsession with you, Mr. Bannister, threatened everything we had built." She shook her head in apparent regret. "When I realized he might expose our operations in his quest for personal vengeance, I knew he had to be removed." "And I was the perfect scapegoat," Cole concluded. "The man who killed his son, now blamed for his murder as well." "Precisely," Sarah nodded approvingly, "though I hadn't anticipated Miss Bennett's involvement. That was an unfortunate complication." Jackson shifted impatiently. "Enough talk. We need to get back to Redemption before Tanner's posse catches up. The hanging's scheduled for tomorrow noon." "Indeed," Sarah agreed, "though I believe we have a small matter to address first." She approached Caroline, eyes fixed on the slight bulge beneath her shirt. "The journal, Miss Bennett. Where is it?" Caroline's face drained of color. "I don't know what you mean."
"Please," Sarah said with exaggerated patience. "I know Reverend Bennett kept detailed records. Records that would be quite damaging in the wrong hands. William was a fool to keep them rather than burn them, but he always did have a sentimental streak." She extended her hand. "The journal, Caroline. Now." When Caroline remained silent, Sarah nodded to Jackson. "Search her thoroughly." As Jackson moved toward Caroline with a predatory grin, Cole felt the rope around his wrists finally give way. In that moment, a gunshot exploded from outside the cabin, followed immediately by shouts and more gunfire. "What the devil?" Grady rushed to the window, only to jerk backward as a bullet shattered the glass and caught him in the shoulder. "Ambush!" one of the guards yelled. "We're surrounded!" In the ensuing chaos, Cole made his move. He lunged from the stool, driving his shoulder into Jackson's midsection and sending them both crashing into the wall. Sarah backed away, reaching into her reticule for a small pistol. The hired gun scrambled for cover, returning fire through windows and doorway. Cole grappled with Jackson, fighting for control of the revolver the foreman had drawn. They crashed across the cabin, smashing furniture, each seeking a lethal advantage. Jackson's wounded shoulder gave Cole an edge, but the foreman fought with the desperate strength of a man who knew defeat meant death. Across the room, Caroline had thrown herself to the floor as bullets whizzed through the cabin. Sarah stood over her pistol, aimed steadily. "The journal," she demanded again, voice icy calm despite the gunfight raging around them. "Give it to me, or die where you lie." Caroline looked up at the woman who had betrayed them, her expression a mixture of defiance and sorrow. "My father trusted you," she said. "He called you friend." "Your father was a fool," Sarah replied. "Now, for the last time, The cabin wall splintered as a rifle shot tore through it, catching Sarah in the side. She staggered, pistol wavering, then crumpled to the floor beside Caroline. Cole, meanwhile, had managed to slam Jackson's gun hand against a table edge, forcing him to drop the revolver. As it clattered to the floor, Cole delivered a crushing blow to the foreman's jaw, sending him sprawling unconscious. "Caroline!" Cole called, ducking as more bullets splintered the cabin walls. "Are you hurt?" "I'm all right," she called back, dragging herself toward him through the debris. "Sarah's shot. Bad." Cole retrieved Jackson's revolver, then pulled Caroline behind an overturned table for cover. Outside, the gunfire was intensifying, but curiously, none of the shots seemed aimed at the cabin anymore. "What's happening?" Caroline asked, peering cautiously over their barricade. One of Grady's men lay dead by the window. The others had either fled or were pinned down outside. Through the broken window, they could see figures moving in the tree line, a large group firing methodically at the hired guns' positions. "I think," Cole said slowly, "we have unexpected allies." As if to confirm his words, a voice called from outside, "Bannister, Miss Bennett, you alive in there?" Cole's eyes widened in recognition. "Jacob, the very same," the shopkeeper's voice replied. "Along with about 20 friends who don't much care for Harrington's brand of justice. Can you make it out?" Cole checked the cabin quickly. The remaining hired gun was dead shot through the window. Jackson lay unconscious, and Sarah Washington sat propped against the wall, blood seeping through her fingers as she pressed them against her side. Her face was ashen, but her eyes remained alert, watching Cole and Caroline with cold calculation. "Go," she said when she saw Cole looking at her. "Finish it? I'm already dead." Caroline knelt beside the wounded woman. "Why, Sarah? All these years, the secrets, the murders. For what?" A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. "Power, child. The only thing worth having in this world. William had the name, the connections. I had the vision." She coughed, blood flecking her lips. "We built an empire from nothing. Would have been larger still, if not for your meddling father." Her eyes hardened. "He discovered everything. Had to be stopped." "You ordered his death," Caroline said softly. "It wasn't a question." "Of course." Sarah's voice weakened. "Business, nothing personal." Cole touched Caroline's shoulder. "We need to go. Now." She nodded, rising slowly. "The journal stays with us, Sarah. The truth will be known." "Truth," Sarah whispered. "What good did it ever do anyone?" Her eyes glazed over, her breathing becoming shallow. They left her there, moving cautiously to the cabin door. Outside, the gunfire had ceased. Jacob Morgan stood in the clearing, surrounded by a diverse group: miners, ranchers, townspeople from Redemption, even several Chinese railroad workers. All were armed, all wore expressions of grim determination. "Thought you might need some assistance," Jacob said by way of greeting. "After Sheriff Tanner arrested me, some friends decided enough was enough, broke me out of jail, then gathered everyone who'd ever suffered under Harrington's rule." He gestured to the assembled group. "Turns out, that was quite a few folks." Sarah Washington, Cole began, trying to process everything that had happened. "She was the real power behind Harrington," Jacob finished. "We know. One of the Chinese workers overheard her giving orders years ago, but who'd believe a Chinaman over a respected businessman and his loyal servant?" He shook his head. "She played her role perfectly." "She's dying inside," Caroline said, "along with Jackson and some hired guns." Jacob nodded to several men who moved cautiously toward the cabin to secure it. "We intercepted a telegram from Tanner to the territorial capital claiming you two killed Harrington and fled. He's formed a posse heading this way now." He checked his pocket watch. "Should be here within the hour." Cole exchanged a glance with Caroline. "Then we need to move."
Get to Laramie, find Judge Foster.
Already taken care of, Jacob said with satisfaction. Peterson rode ahead with copies of the key pages from Reverend Bennett's journal, the ones mentioning the church funds and Harrington's threats. Judge Foster has issued warrants for Tanner and several others. Federal marshals are on their way to redemption as we speak. Relief washed over Cole so profound he nearly staggered. It's over then. Not quite, Jacob cautioned. Tanner's still out there with armed men. And while the marshals believe the evidence against him, they're still not convinced of your innocence in Harrington's death. He looked at them gravely. We need to get you to Laramie, let you tell your story directly to Judge Foster. Caroline straightened her shoulders, clutching the journal tightly. Then let's go. It's time the full truth was known. As Jacob's men secured fresh horses for them, Cole found himself standing beside Caroline, watching the sun set behind the mountains they had crossed. So much had happened in so few days, a lifetime of violence and revelation compressed into a handful of desperate hours. You could still head west, he said quietly. California, Oregon, a fresh start away from all this. Caroline turned to him, her green eyes steady and clear despite her exhaustion. Is that what you want Cole Bannister to run away now after everything? Cole considered the question honestly. For 22 years running had been his answer to every problem, every painful memory. The thought of continuing that pattern was suddenly intolerable. No, he admitted, I'm done running, but I want you safe, Caroline. She took his hand, her touch sending warmth through him despite the evening chill. Then we faced Judge Foster together, with the truth as our shield. She glanced toward Jacob and the others preparing for the journey to Laramie. We're not alone anymore, Cole. That counts for something. He squeezed her hand gently. It counts for everything. As they mounted their horses, Cole cast one last look at the mining cabin, where Sarah Washington lay dying, the architect of so much suffering, yet in the end, just another soul consumed by bitterness and the quest for power. Tomorrow, they would face a different kind of judgment in Laramie, one that offered the possibility of redemption rather than revenge. For the first time since Gettysburg, Cole Bannister rode toward his future with hope rather than dread. The weight of the past finally beginning to lift from his shoulders. Dawn painted the eastern sky with bands of crimson and gold as the riders crested the final ridge before Laramie. They had traveled through the night, pushing hard, alternating between trot and canter to spare the horses while making the best possible time. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, Sheriff Tanner and his posse still pursued, though Jacob's scouts reported they had fallen several hours behind. Cole rode beside Caroline, watching her from the corner of his eye. Despite the grueling pace and her evident exhaustion, she sat straight in the saddle, chin-lifted eyes fixed on the horizon. The journal remained secure inside her shirt, pressed against her heart like a talisman. Laramie spread before them in the valley below a proper town, with painted buildings, boardwalks, and a territorial courthouse whose cupola caught the first rays of sunlight. After the violence and corruption of redemption, it seemed almost like a mirage, a vision of civilization in the wilderness. Judge Foster will be at the courthouse by 8, Jacob said, drawing his horse alongside theirs. That gives us time to clean up and get some food. I know a place where we'll be welcome. They followed him down into town, drawing curious glances from early risers, but no particular alarm. Jacob led them to a modest boarding house on a side street where a gray-haired woman greeted him with evident relief. "Jacob Morgan, you had me worried sick," she scolded, though her eyes were kind. "When we heard about the trouble in redemption—" "It's a long story, Mrs. Hollister," Jacob interrupted gently. "One I'll tell you over breakfast, if you're willing to feed 3 hungry travelers." Of course, of course." The woman ushered them inside, clucking sympathetically at Caroline's disheveled appearance. "Poor dear, you look half dead from the trail. Let's get you cleaned up first. I've hot water ready, and I believe my daughter's dress might fit you."
Caroline accepted the kindness with quiet gratitude, disappearing upstairs with Mrs. Hollister while Jacob showed Cole to a washroom in the back. Clean clothes awaited him there, simple but well-made, if a bit loose on his frame. "Mrs. Hollister's late husband," Jacob explained. "She keeps his things for travelers in need." Cole washed away days of trail dust, the hot water revealing bruises and small cuts he hadn't even noticed in the chaos of their escape. As he trimmed his beard and combed his hair, a stranger looked back at him from the mirror, older, wearier, but somehow more settled than the drifter who had ridden into Redemption Valley seeking peace. Breakfast awaited in the small dining room. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Cole ate mechanically, at first his body demanding sustenance, even as his mind turned over the events of the past days and the confrontation to come. Caroline joined them, shortly transformed by clean clothes and washed hair. Mrs. Hollister had provided a simple blue dress that fit her reasonably well, though it was perhaps a bit more fashionable than her usual severe attire. Her hair was arranged in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, still damp from washing. "You look," Cole began, then faltered, uncertain of the appropriate compliment. "Human again," Caroline finished with a small smile. "Amazing what soap and clean clothes can accomplish." She sat beside him, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Hollister with murmured thanks. Jacob had spent the meal briefing their hostess on the situation in Redemption. Mrs. Hollister proved to be not merely a sympathetic ear, but a valuable ally. Her late husband had been Judge Foster's clerk, and she herself now worked as a cook in the judge's household. "Albert Foster is a good man," she assured them. "Fair-minded, incorruptible. If anyone will listen to your story with an open mind, it's him." "Will he believe us?" Caroline asked, her hand unconsciously moving to the place where the journal rested. "We're accusing the most powerful men in Redemption of murder, corruption, and conspiracy." "He'll believe evidence," Mrs. Hollister replied pragmatically. "And from what Jacob tells me, you have plenty of that." Shortly before 8, they made their way to the courthouse, a handsome brick building with white columns flanking the entrance. Jacob's men had dispersed throughout the town, keeping watch for Tanner's posse, while maintaining a low profile to avoid alarming the citizens of Laramie. The courthouse was already busy, clerks and lawyers moving through the corridors with purposeful strides. Jacob led them to a polished door marked Judge Albert Foster Territorial Circuit Court. A young man looked up from a desk in the anteroom. "May I help you?" "We need to see Judge Foster immediately," Jacob said. "It's a matter of life and death." The clerk's expression remained professionally skeptical until Mrs. Hollister stepped forward. "Thomas, these people have traveled through the night to bring evidence of serious crimes in Redemption Valley. Please, tell Albert they're here." The clerk, Thomas, responded to her familiar use of the judge's first name, rising immediately. "Of course, Mrs. Hollister. Please, wait here." He disappeared through an inner door, returning moments later. "The judge will see you now." Judge Albert Foster proved to be a tall, lean man in his 60s, with a shock of white hair and penetrating blue eyes beneath bushy brows. He rose from behind a massive oak desk as they entered, greeting Mrs. Hollister warmly before turning his attention to the others. "I understand you bring troubling news from Redemption," he said without preamble, gesturing for them to be seated. "Mr. Peterson arrived yesterday with some remarkable documents, but declined to tell the full story, saying others would come who could speak with more authority." His gaze settled on Caroline. "You would be Reverend Bennett's daughter, I presume?" "Yes, Your Honor, Caroline Bennett." "And you, sir?" The judge turned to Cole. "Cole Bannister, Your Honor." Recognition flickered in Foster's eyes. "Ah, the former lawman who supposedly murdered William Harrington." He held up a hand as Cole began to protest. "I said, supposedly, Mr. Bannister. I've received Sheriff Tanner's telegrams, but I've also received Mr. Peterson's evidence suggesting a rather different sequence of events."
He folded his hands on the desk. I believe I need to hear the full story from the beginning. For the next hour, they took turns relating the events since Cole's arrival in Redemption Valley, the hanging of Luis Rodriguez Harrington's attempts to buy Cole's land, the revelation about Robert Harrington's death at Gettysburg, their flight from the burning cabin, and finally, the shocking truth about Sarah Washington's role in controlling Harrington and orchestrating years of corruption and murder. Throughout, Judge Foster listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but otherwise allowing them to speak without interruption. When they finished, he sat in silence for several moments, digesting what he had heard. "May I see the journal?" he finally asked. Caroline removed it carefully from inside her dress and placed it on the desk. Foster opened it with reverent hands, scanning several pages before looking up again. "I knew Thomas Bennett slightly," he said. "Met him at a territorial judiciary conference some years ago. He struck me as a man of uncommon moral courage. These journal entries are consistent with my impression of him." He closed the book carefully. However, the allegations against Sheriff Tanner and the late Mr. Harrington, not to mention Mrs. Washington, are extremely serious. "I cannot act on your word alone, even with this journal as corroboration." Cole's heart sank. "What more do you need, Judge?" "Witnesses, individuals willing to testify under oath about what they experienced." Foster stroked his beard thoughtfully. "From what you've told me, there should be many in Redemption who suffered under Harrington's regime." "Most were too afraid to speak out while he lived," Caroline said. "But now—" "Now they're beginning to find their courage," Jacob interjected. "The men who helped us at the mining camp, they'll testify, and others will follow once they know it's safe." Foster nodded. "Good. I'll issue subpoenas immediately." He fixed Cole with a penetrating gaze. "As for you, Mr. Bannister, your situation is complicated by the fact that you fled after Harrington's death, making you appear guilty regardless of who actually pulled the trigger." "I had little choice, Your Honor," Cole replied evenly. "With Tanner controlled by Sarah Washington, there was no chance of a fair hearing in Redemption." "Perhaps not," Foster conceded. "Nevertheless, until this matter is resolved, I must remand you to custody." He raised a hand as Caroline began to protest. "Not the jail, Miss Bennett. Given the circumstances, I believe house arrest at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house will suffice, with your word as a former lawman that you won't attempt to flee." "You have it," Cole said without hesitation. "Good." Foster rang a small bell on his desk, and the clerk reappeared. "Thomas, prepare orders for federal marshals to proceed to Redemption Valley and arrest Sheriff Tanner on suspicion of corruption and conspiracy to commit murder. Also draft subpoenas for the witnesses Mr. Morgan will identify." He turned back to his visitors. "This process will take time, weeks, perhaps months, but justice will be served, I promise you that." As they rose to leave, a commotion erupted in the outer office. The door burst open, revealing Sheriff Tanner, dusty from the trail and red-faced with exertion. Two deputies flanked him, hands hovering near their weapons. "Judge Foster," Tanner said breathlessly, "I've come to take custody of two fugitives, Cole Bannister and Caroline Bennett, wanted for the murder of William Harrington, and—" He broke off as he spotted them standing before the judge's desk. "There they are. I demand you turn them over to me immediately." Foster regarded him coldly. "Sheriff Tanner, you have no authority in my jurisdiction, and I have serious questions about your authority even in Redemption Valley." He held up the journal. "I have evidence suggesting you have been complicit in numerous crimes, including the murder of Reverend Thomas Bennett." Tanner's face paled beneath its trail grime. "That's absurd. I've been Redemption's sheriff for 12 years. During which time you've apparently served the interests of William Harrington and Sarah Washington rather than justice," Foster interrupted. "I was just preparing orders for your arrest, Sheriff. You've saved the marshals a trip." Tanner's expression hardened. His hand dropped to his revolver.
I'm not going to let a bunch of lies destroy my reputation, Judge. These two are coming back to redemption to face proper justice. Thomas, Foster said calmly to his clerk, fetch the marshals from downstairs, please. The clerk slipped out a side door as tension filled the room. Tanner's deputies looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between their boss and the judge. Think carefully about your next move, Sheriff, Foster warned. Drawing a weapon in my courtroom would be a grave mistake. Cole moved slightly, positioning himself between Caroline and Tanner. He was unarmed. They had left their weapons at the boarding house, but his stance made clear his intentions if Tanner tried anything. For a long moment, the room balanced on a knife's edge of potential violence. Then one of Tanner's deputies broke the silence. Sheriff, I didn't sign on for this. He stepped away, hands raised. Fighting federal marshals, threatening a judge. This ain't right. The second deputy followed suit, leaving Tanner isolated. His hand still hovered near his gun, indecision written across his features. It's over, Tanner, Cole said quietly. Harrington's dead. Sarah's dying or dead by now. There's no one left to protect you. Something crumpled in Tanner's expression, not surrender exactly, but the recognition of inevitability. His hand fell away from his weapon just as 3 federal marshals entered the room, alerted by the clerk. Marshal Davis, Foster addressed their leader, please take Sheriff Tanner into custody on charges of corruption, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. His deputies are to be detained as material witnesses, but not charged at this time. Yes, Your Honor. The marshal, a weathered man with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward, gesturing for Tanner to surrender his weapon. Nice and easy, Sheriff. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Tanner handed over his revolver with reluctance, his eyes burning with resentment, as the marshals escorted him and his deputies from the room. Foster sighed heavily once they were gone. That could have ended very differently. Well done keeping your composure, Mr. Bannister. Thank you, Your Honor, Cole replied, feeling tension drain from his shoulders. What happens now? Now, Foster said, we begin the long process of uncovering the full truth and bringing all responsible parties to justice. He looked at Caroline. Miss Bennett, I understand your desire to return to redemption, but I must advise against it until we've secured the town. There may be others loyal to Harrington or Mrs. Washington who would seek to silence you. I need to return eventually, Caroline said firmly. The church will survive without you for a time, Foster interrupted gently. Your father built a strong foundation there. Trust it to stand, while you help us dismantle the corruption that took his life. Caroline nodded reluctantly. Very well, Your Honor. I'll remain in Laramie as long as necessary. Excellent, Foster turned to Jacob. Mr. Morgan, I'll need your help identifying witnesses and documenting the extent of Harrington's operations. From what you've told me, this conspiracy may extend beyond redemption to other towns in the territory. I'm at your disposal, Judge, Jacob replied, and I have men I trust who can help. Good. Foster rose, signaling the end of their meeting. Thomas will arrange accommodations for Miss Bennett near Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. Mr. Bannister, remember, you are under house arrest until this matter is resolved. I'll require your testimony in the coming days as we build our case. They left the courthouse under escort of one of the marshals, the morning sun now high in a clear blue sky. The streets of Laramie bustled with normal activity, the citizens unaware of the drama that had just unfolded or the corruption being unearthed in a neighboring town. Back at the boarding house, Mrs. Hollister prepared a room for Cole that would serve as his comfortable prison for the foreseeable future. It was small, but clean, with a window overlooking a garden where late autumn flowers still bloomed. Not exactly what you expected when you purchased that homestead, is it? Caroline asked, as they stood in the doorway surveying his new quarters. Not exactly, Cole agreed with a rueful smile, but better than the alternatives. Judge Foster is a good man, she said. He'll ensure justice is done. I believe he will. Cole turned to face her. What about you, Caroline? When this is over, if I'm exonerated, what will you do? She considered the question carefully. Return to redemption, I suppose. Continue my father's work. The people there will need guidance more than ever once the full truth comes out. She met his gaze steadily. And you? Will you continue drifting, or— The unspoken alternative hung between them, delicate as spun glass. I still own that land, Cole said quietly. It's good ground. With some work it could support a decent ranch. Maybe even a family someday. Color touched Caroline's cheeks, but she didn't look away. That sounds like a man considering putting down roots. Maybe I am. Cole took her hand gently, for the right reasons. A discreet cough from the hallway interrupted them. Jacob stood there, an apologetic expression on his face. Sorry to intrude, but Marshal Davis wants to take formal statements from all of us while events are still fresh in our minds. Caroline squeezed Cole's hand before releasing it. Of course. We'll be right there. Actually, Jacob said, he wants to interview you separately. Standard procedure, he says. She nodded, understanding. I'll go first, then. With a last glance at Cole, she followed Jacob downstairs. Cole moved to the window, gazing out at the peaceful garden below. After days of violence and desperate flight, the normality of the scene seemed almost dreamlike, a vision of what life could be without the constant shadow of the past hanging over him. For 22 years since Gettysburg, he had carried the weight of Robert Harrington's death, never imagining that fate would eventually bring him face to face with the young lieutenant's father. The coincidence still seemed impossible, yet somehow fitting, as if the universe itself had conspired to force him to confront his deepest regrets. Now, William Harrington was dead, Sarah Washington dying or dead, and the truth about Redemption Valley's corruption was finally emerging into the light. Soon, God willing, Caroline's father and the others who had died for crossing Harrington would receive the justice they deserved. And then what Cole leaned against the window frame, considering possibilities that had seemed unthinkable just days ago. A home, a purpose, perhaps even a partner to share both. Caroline Bennett was unlike any woman he had ever known. Strong yet gentle, principled yet practical. Her courage during their flight had impressed him deeply, but it was her unwavering moral compass that truly humbled him. Despite everything she had endured, her father's murder, years of fighting alone against Harrington's influence, the recent days of mortal danger, she remained committed to returning to redemption, to continuing her father's work of bringing light to dark places. Could he do the same? After decades of running from his ghosts, could he finally stand firm, build something lasting? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Marshal Davis stood in the doorway, notebook in hand. Mr. Bannister, I need to take your statement now, he said. From the beginning, if you don't mind, and leave nothing out, especially regarding Gettysburg. 3 months later, Cole stood on the porch of his newly rebuilt cabin, watching spring bring green life back to Redemption Valley. The winter had been harsh but productive. Judge Foster's investigation had uncovered the full extent of Harrington and Sarah Washington's corruption, leading to multiple arrests and the dismantling of their criminal enterprise. Sarah had died from her wounds before reaching Laramie, taking many secrets to her grave, but leaving enough evidence behind to convict her co-conspirators. Sheriff Tanner had turned state's evidence revealing details of years of extortion, theft, and murder in exchange for a reduced sentence. Jackson and the surviving hired guns faced the gallows for their roles in multiple killings. And Cole Bannister had been fully exonerated of William Harrington's death, the judge ruling that Sarah Washington's confession and subsequent actions constituted sufficient evidence of her guilt. His house arrest had ended just after Christmas, though he had remained in Laramie through the worst of the winter, helping Foster's investigation and planning for his return to redemption. Now, with April sunshine warming the valley, he surveyed his property with quiet satisfaction. The cabin was larger now,
properly finished with glass windows and a covered porch. A small barn stood nearby, housing 2 horses and a milk cow. Fields had been plowed for spring planting, and 50 head of cattle grazed on the upper pastures, the beginnings of what might someday be a prosperous ranch. More importantly, Redemption Valley itself was healing. With Harrington's oppressive influence removed, the community had begun to rebuild around principles of fairness and mutual support. Jacob Morgan had been elected mayor in a special election implementing reforms that ensured no single individual could again accumulate the power Harrington had wielded. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Cole's attention. Caroline rode into view, her auburn hair gleaming in the spring sunshine. She had returned to Redemption a month earlier than Cole, reclaiming her role at the church, with the full support of a chastened congregation who now recognized the courage she had shown in standing against Harrington all those years. "Good morning, Mr. Bannister," she called as she dismounted. "I see you're admiring your handiwork." "Our handiwork," Cole corrected, helping her onto the porch. "I couldn't have rebuilt this place without your help." It was true. Despite her duties at the church, Caroline had spent countless hours helping design the expanded cabin, selecting furnishings, even assisting with the actual construction when hands were needed. The result reflected both their sensibilities, practical yet comfortable, simple yet welcoming. "I brought something for you," Caroline said, retrieving a package from her saddlebag. "It arrived on yesterday's stage." Cole unwrapped the parcel, carefully revealing a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a gold locket oval with delicate filigree work around the edges. "How—" he began, stunned. "Judge Foster," Caroline explained. "When you mentioned the locket in your testimony, he made inquiries. It was found among your mother's possessions after her death, eventually making its way to a cousin in Illinois who kept it all these years, not knowing its significance." Cole opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was the miniature portrait of a beautiful dark-haired woman, Elizabeth Harrington Roberts' mother and William's wife. "Foster suggested returning it to the Harrington family," Caroline continued, "but there are no direct heirs left. He thought you might want it as closure." Cole studied the portrait silently. Elizabeth Harrington gazed back with gentle eyes that held no accusation, no bitterness, only the serene confidence of a woman who had sat for her likeness, never imagining the journey it would take or the lives it would touch. "Thank you," he said softly, closing the locket. "This means more than I can say." They sat together on the porch steps, watching clouds drift across the valley. The comfortable silence between them was still new enough to savor, but familiar enough to feel right. "The church committee met yesterday," Caroline said after a while. "They have officially appointed me as minister." Cole turned to her in surprise. "I thought they were bringing someone from Denver." "They were," she acknowledged with a small smile. "But apparently the congregation insisted on keeping me. Said they'd rather have a woman who stood for truth than a man who might bend with the wind." "Congratulations," Cole said warmly. "Your father would be proud." "I think he would." Her expression grew thoughtful. "It's strange. For 3 years after his death, I stayed in Redemption out of obligation to honor his memory, to continue his work. Now I stay because I've chosen to, because this valley really is a place of redemption for all of us." Cole nodded understanding. "For me as well. Gettysburg will always be part of me, but it no longer defines me." He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "I've found something worth building here, Caroline. Something worth staying for." The question that had been growing between them for months hung in the air unspoken, but increasingly urgent. Cole had hesitated to voice it, uncertain if the timing was right, if she felt as he did, if the shadow of recent events still loomed too large. Caroline characteristically addressed it directly. "Cole Bannister, are you ever going to ask me to marry you, or must I take matters into my own hands as usual?" A startled laugh escaped him. "Is that what you want?"
"It is," she replied simply, "though I won't wear black on our wedding day, nor will I give up my position at the church. I wouldn't have it any other way." Cole turned to face her fully. "Caroline Bennett, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because circumstances forced us together, not because of any obligation, but because I love you and want to build a life with you." "Yes," she said, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Because I love you too, and because some paths, however unlikely their beginning, are meant to be walked together." He kissed her, then gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded in kind. When they finally parted, the sun had moved westward, casting long shadows across the valley that had brought them together through such unlikely circumstances. "We should tell Jacob," Caroline said after a moment, "and Mrs. Peterson and the others who helped us." "Tomorrow," Cole suggested. "Today I'd like to keep this moment just for us." She agreed with a smile, and they remained on the porch as afternoon mellowed toward evening, planning their future in quiet conversation while the valley stretched before them redeemed and renewing in the spring sunshine. Later, as twilight deepened, Cole walked Caroline to her horse for the ride back to town. As he helped her mount, she looked down at him with an expression of profound contentment. "You know," she said, "my father used to say that true redemption isn't found in starting over somewhere new, but in returning to face your past with courage and finding it transformed by grace." Cole nodded, thinking of all they had endured to reach this moment. The violence, the revelations, the painful truths about both Harrington and themselves. "Your father was a wise man." "He was," Caroline agreed. "And he would have liked you, Cole Bannister." She gathered her reins. "I'll see you at church tomorrow." "Front pew," he promised. As he watched her ride away, silhouetted against the darkening sky, Cole felt the last weight of Gettysburg finally lift from his shoulders. The past would always be part of him, the battles fought, the lives taken and saved, the long years of wandering. But now, those experiences served a purpose, shaping him into a man capable of loving Caroline Bennett as she deserved, of building something meaningful in this valley of second chances. He turned back to his cabin, their cabin soon, and thought of the words carved on Reverend Bennett's headstone, words Caroline had chosen from her father's journals. "In this life, we are not called to escape our past, but to redeem it." Cole Bannister, once a soldier, once a lawman, once a drifter, now stood firmly on land he could call his own, his future stretching before him bright with promise. The forgotten souls of his past, Robert Harrington, Luis Rodriguez, Reverend Bennett, even William Harrington and Sarah Washington, would remain with him always, not as haunting ghosts, but as reminders of the cost of hatred and the power of truth. And beside him would stand Caroline, equally scarred by life's battles, but equally determined to create something beautiful from the broken pieces. Together, they would build their home in Redemption Valley, a living testament to the belief that no soul is truly forgotten as long as someone remembers its worth. The end.